people from trying to do is running these, these platforms on something like a tablet or a phone or something. They're not made for that. The other thing is wireless connections. I mean, although you can use them, they can cause more problems, more points of failure. The game master should probably be wired or connected to a wireless or a wired connection. It's not as critical if the players do or not, but there again, if they're having problems connecting, especially if it's only one person, more than likely it's something to do with their bandwidth or their connectivity. And I've seen some strange stuff. I had somebody ask me, "Oh, I can't connect," and he's getting mad and frustrated. So once we troubleshooted into what he was doing, we found out that he was using his wife's laptop in his truck, using his cell phone as a Wi-Fi hotspot. That is absolutely not the way to use Fantasy Grounds. So try to have a good, stable connection is basically what I'm getting at. And I made a little graphic about it. It's not required, but it is something that I definitely would really suggest. The game preparation, we're not really going to connect to the table, so you guys don't have to worry about that too much. Although if you do want to ask questions, that's fine. Just go ahead and speak up. The push to talk is just for background noise, or just mute your mic if you don't have that set up. We just don't want to hear dogs barking and people yelling and that sort of thing. GaryCon is something that I have never had the chance to participate because of where it's located. This is the first year that I've been able to really do anything in it. Another thing is I ran into some hardship a year or two ago, and my mother had passed away. I lost my job, and all kinds of things coming down on me. So I did a GoFundMe, which kind of sheepishly, because I kind of thought I felt bad about it, but I did it. And one of the Gygax family members had donated to my cause, so I really appreciated that. So that's another reason I'm volunteering the time here. We're not going to cover character creation too much, but that is a very integral part of Fantasy Grounds. So if you're going to run games using Fantasy Grounds, I really advise that you learn to do that. It is very important. It would be a whole nother 2-hour seminar if we were going to go through that, but it is a very important process in using Fantasy Grounds. Technically, where a lot of things go wrong is the characters themselves. Usually the game itself is pretty cut and dry, and it's not bad once you understand it, but the players seem to, no matter what you do, they'll find a way to break it. So character creation is paramount to running this virtual tabletop. Usually the modules and stuff are good. It's just the way the character sheets are built, or how they customized them, or whatever they've done to them. Also, if you click on the load screen, I've kind of given a overview of what all the little fancy trinkets are when you first start up Fantasy Grounds. If you guys are, and girls, if you guys are inclined, you can download the 2 files that I included in this text channel near the top. So there's the curriculum, and then there's a module that you can load in Fantasy Grounds. Now, you're not obligated to do that, but if you're interested after this, that's the resources that I've given there. And then, of course, I've put our link to our Fantasy Grounds College community. So if you guys want to take this further, maybe you do want to take a character creation class, we do offer those at least once or twice a week. So it's up to you guys. How much time and effort do you really want to put into it? Yep. It's the voice. Oh, that's great. Steve, that's awesome. All right, so enough babbling. I'll get into Fantasy Grounds. I'm going to do a screen share. Do any of you have any questions or comments or anything you'd like to present before we get started? Okay, great. I will get going. Again, I just want to thank you guys for showing up. Welcome to GaryCon if this is your first time. It's absolutely my first time. And it is something that I hope that I can continue to participate in the future. I'm hoping that eventually we will be able to get more involved with this and become more part of this sort of major event. We do a lot of these events throughout the year in the college, and when we've done them, that we've come across all kinds of pitfalls and problems. So we've got a lot of this sorted out for the most part. The only thing that can really truly go wrong at this point is if we have some sort of hiccup with technology. But other than that, it seems pretty stable. A lot of us don't have a choice to get together with our friends anymore, so Fantasy Grounds definitely facilitates that. I get a lot of, what's better is Fantasy Grounds better, is Roll20 better? There's all kinds of different new ones that are coming up. I keep hearing a lot of good things about Foundry. I've watched some videos and talked to some individuals and made my own choices. First of all, I've already purchased a lot of content in Fantasy Grounds, so I don't really want to migrate it to another system. The other drawback or the complaint I hear is, well, I already have D&D Beyond. I have all the books. I don't want to buy them again. How do I use Fantasy Grounds? Well, that is a choice, and that is something that you have to decide what's worth your time or not. You can enter a lot of your own data into Fantasy Grounds, but it takes time, and you have to have an understanding of it. But once you do, yes, you can absolutely add your own rule books and those sort of things. But you have to know all the coding, the formatting, the phrasing, the way it's worded. Putting in rule books is a lot more difficult than adventures. So I would say if you just got the 3 core books, or even if you just use the SRD, which comes with a standard license, you can build upon that if you know what you're doing. There's nothing saying you have to go out and buy a bunch of things. I recommend at the bare minimum to have at least a player's handbook. That would take you to the level where, okay, I got a basis, a foundation, and you can pretty much build from there. It makes life a lot easier. If you want to get the other 2 core books, such as the DM's Guide and the Monster Manual, you'll get a lot more artwork, a lot more tables, a lot more templates, treasure, magic items, that sort of thing. If you just have the SRD, which is the system reference document, you pretty much have the basis of what everything's built upon. You just don't have the artwork, the fancy monsters that are copyrighted, and you don't have a lot of the little this and that's from all the different campaign settings. So if you already own content minus the books, I have the books, and I have D&D Beyond, and I have Fantasy Grounds. But if you have already a lot of the hardback books, I would say just get the rule books and then go from there, because you can enter the data from PDFs and from your hardback books if you really want to. If you have D&D Beyond and you want to integrate it with Fantasy Grounds, it would be very simple to input an adventure just by copying and pasting the data. It really depends on what level you're at and what you're comfortable with and the types of purchases you want to make. The other thing is usability and how it works and how it interfaces. The only thing I can say in favor of any of these, or for Fantasy Grounds, is that you can play and use it offline. So a lot of the other services, you have to have some sort of connection. Whereas Fantasy Grounds, you do not have to be online. So that is a plus for me. If I can't connect to the internet and I do not have access to my content, it's no good to me. The other thing is the community. Fantasy Grounds community, from what I've seen, we've had a few bozos and people that are toxic, but there's not a lot of it. It seems to be a lot more older people. When I mean older, I'm talking like, late 30s on up to their 70s. There are a lot of new younger people trying it out, but I think the majority of the people who are using this platform are on the older side. So at least 50% of the community is, probably 30 plus. As far as men to women ratio and other cultures and such, I think Fantasy Grounds has a little ways to go, but I think once it becomes more of a thing and more popular, I think that'll change. There are women who play. There are people of color that play. There's gay, straight people playing. I don't think they have gone out and intentionally excluded anybody. I think it's just a matter of exposure and getting people familiar with the content and the platform itself. So they're doing okay in that regard. And as far as using the software, you have to put in your time to get used to what it can and cannot do. And that's what I'm going to help you a little bit with today and kind of guide you through that process. So is there any other questions before I dive into this? All right. So first things first, I've started Fantasy Grounds. This is the launch screen. Generally, if you have a license, you will enter that. You'll go to the website and register there because that's your account and your password when you register with the website. If you are a U.S. citizen, it is better to probably go through the direct Fantasy Grounds store as opposed to Steam. However, Steam, if you have gift certificates and things like that, you might have to go that way. But it's generally better to go directly through the store than Steam. Steam is really just a purchase point. It really doesn't host anything. It doesn't even have a whole lot to do with Fantasy Grounds other than a place to buy it, hold your licenses, and keep track of how many hours you put into it. Other than that, there's no connection between the two. However, if you live beyond the United States in another country or somewhere overseas, it might be better for you to use Steam because the price is matched locally. So that's the only advantage I can see for using Steam. You can connect your Steam account to Fantasy Grounds, and if you are a Paizo / any type of Paizo game that they have offered in Virtual Tabletop, so it's Pathfinder 1 and 2, and also Starfinder. Those individuals, and you have content on their digital store, you can link that account as a partner affiliate account to Fantasy Grounds. And once Fantasy Grounds, the website and the database recognizes that you have an account and vice versa, what will happen is all your purchases that you've made before will transfer over to Fantasy Grounds, and it will take anywhere from $5 to $12 off your purchase depending on what you already have. So this only counts for PDF, the digital content, not hardbacks. The other way around would be if you purchased a module at full price on Fantasy Grounds, it's going to look a little expensive more than the D&D or some of the other content, and that's because you're not only getting the Fantasy Grounds copy, you're also getting the PDF. So if you have Paizo content, register on their website with put in your credentials for Fantasy Grounds, and then on the Fantasy Grounds website, you can also register there. And once you do that, you refresh it and sync your account. And what will happen is it'll send your purchases over to their store, and you can download the PDFs almost immediately. So that's a cool partnership that Fantasy Grounds has with Paizo. Now, they don't have that with any other company yet. So if you have content on D&D Beyond or somewhere else, it doesn't work that way. Maybe it'll happen in the future, but for the time being, it's not there. So, yes, I am screen sharing shortly. Hold on a sec. Sorry about that. I was actually looking at the graphic that was put in Classroom 1, but I'll go ahead and do the screen share too. Sorry about that. Okay. So I was looking at this graphic here, but we can move on. But basically, when you start up Fantasy Grounds, you have basically this log list here, and then next to that is a folder where your data is kept. And that's where you put your third-party modules, extensions, anything that would be added on to the Fantasy Grounds, like third-party stuff. When you load the screen, you come up, you're going to go to the settings menu, which is this basic tab. And from here on the top, you can change your scale, your UI. So I have mine set to 80%, but depending on the resolution of your monitor and how big it is, you have to play around with that number to get something that's right for you. And what will happen is if you scale it down, you'll get more room, but then all the fonts and stuff get smaller. If you go over 100, which you'll be able to see everything better, what you'll end up with is hardly any space. Now you can stretch Fantasy Grounds across two screens, But most people, I'd say 60% of the people that use Fantasy Grounds just use one screen. So you can't really break any out. You can't break any windows out or anything like that. It's all pretty much self-contained. The best you can do is maximize or minimize Fantasy Grounds and then stretch it across the screens that you want to use. Your password and your username is going to match what's on your website. Once that's in there, you'll be able to access the store, which will allow you to download anything you purchase off the store or even off of Steam. You just have to remember to synchronize your account after you do some purchases. And that will tell Fantasy Grounds that, hey, I purchased something off Steam, and it puts the license key in, and it lets you download it. So Fantasy Grounds is pretty much self-contained once everything's downloaded. And when I mean self-contained, that means I can play and use Fantasy Grounds offline and not be connected to anything. So that's why I appreciate the way it's a standalone. It doesn't rely on a network all the time to do things, just to update or to play online. If you were to play over, like your table, and you just want to throw Fantasy Grounds up on a big screen, it's perfect for that. I'm not saying you can't do that with other platforms, but if you can't get online for some reason, you're not going to be able to do it unless you have a way to run it on your own virtual server or something like that. I'm sure someone's found a way around it. So that is basically your load screens, and you're going to have, like I said, your scaling, your license key, your username, password, and then you log in. Once you're logged in, then you can access your purchases and your licenses. Generally, when you first start, you'll download the demo, you'll install it, update it, and then go into the Fantasy Grounds store and register. Set up your password and your that thing. You'll plug that into your demo license with your just your username and your password. Once you've purchased a key for the Fantasy Grounds platform itself, you'll put that in and update it and save it, reboot, update it, and then you'll get all your keys and everything will be in order. So that's pretty much the order of that once you downloaded it. Macs are still a little kind of iffy about the, how it works and stuff. I think they're still kind of working out a few bugs, but you can run this on a Mac and also in Linux. Those two platforms are a little bit behind as far as updates and support, but they are coming along. They're a lot better than they used to be, from what I've been told. You cannot use Fantasy Grounds Unity with Catalina or less. I don't know why, but they changed the 32 to 64-bit support, and it's no longer backwards compatible with older versions of the Catalina operating system and backwards. And I think that Fantasy Grounds for Windows is only Windows 8 and above. I could be wrong about that, but I think that it still works with Windows 8. So those are just some specs for that. Using a Mac, it is okay. Okay, got it. Yep. Yeah, I figured that I'm sorry about that, but that's just the nature of it. And you remember how Macs used to be when you would go and look for a video game. You had to wait a year for it to come out on Mac. I don't know why that was, but it's always been that way, and it's kind of crappy, but anyhow. So once you've done that and you've installed everything, you'll notice your name will be up on the top left. If the lobby is up, which is where people will connect to your table, it'll say connected up here on the top left, and then your license level will be over here on the right. Once you see that, you're probably in the green. So first thing you're going to probably do is want to create a campaign. Now, a campaign doesn't necessarily mean a game. It could be a session. It could be somewhere where you work. It can be anything like that, but they named it campaign. If you're a player, you would click Join Campaign, and you get this lobby type thing. And I'm going to switch over to, let's see. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. Yep. You guys should be able to see what I'm doing now because I'm on the whole screen now, so hopefully. So it runs great on Mac. That's good. Good to hear. All right, so hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing and follow along. If I'm not visible, then I apologize. Let's see. So I'm going to go and start showing you more of the Fantasy Grounds things, but these are all the setup things, the things that you have to consider. Or if you're going to load an existing campaign, which I'll do, I got a special GaryCon one that I have loaded up or ready. But then you can create a campaign depending on which rule set you've purchased and which one that you own or which ones that you're interested in. There's a plethora of platforms. In this case, if you wanted, let's say, Pathfinder 2, you would click there, and you'd set your password and your chat name, and then you would set whether you're going to run it on a network or privately or however you want to do that. You'd give it a name. You would load up any extensions or decals if you wanted to do so. Then you hit start, and that's basically how you would create a new campaign. I'm actually going to load up an existing campaign that I created just a couple days ago, and this is for GaryCon. So this is how I'd go back into archives. So Fantasy Grounds Classic, which used wine emulation was rough. Unity was a godsend. Yeah, I agree with you. I've heard those horror stories. Okay, so the GaryCon campaign is what I'm going to be loading. Password is Gary, and I put GM Laerun. Now, you guys don't have to connect anything. I just want to show you that. And then I have it set to a LAN connection, so even if you knew, everything could connect anyways. So the other thing is this list here is the extensions is either third party or extensions like themes that come with Fantasy Grounds. Extensions generally change the way Fantasy Grounds works. So in the beginning, I wouldn't download or use too many of them. They tend to break when Fantasy Grounds updates. They are usually not official, and you are kind of at the mercy of whoever's supporting it, whoever builds it. So if they quit doing it and you're relying on that for your campaign, you might be stuck unless you pick up the mantle and learn to do it yourself. So those are kind of like mods that are outside of the function of Fantasy Grounds. They don't always work, and when they do work, they require maintenance and keeping up with the author. I loaded a decal here that comes with the rule set for Lost Mine of Phandelver, and I have the Wizard's Desk theme, and there's several others. They have a Western, a Modern, Gothic. We're not going to have time to look at all those, but if you're interested in those, they're on the store, or you can find them on various YouTube videos. The other thing is, like, I have things that change the way Fantasy Grounds works, so I won't load those until I've tested them. So what I recommend that you do before you start playing is create a campaign for your actual game, and then create a session for like goofing around and checking things out. That way, if anything breaks or if it damages your session or corrupts it, you're not going to ruin your campaign. So you can have more than one session or campaign going. Just make one for your kind of your goof off time, and that's pretty safe. So once that's done and you have all your parameters set in, your extensions are set, and you're ready to go, you hit start and it'll start loading. While this is loading, I'd like to running LAN or cloud. It says LAN on mine. I didn't put it on LAN. We're not going to be connecting anyway, so I didn't do that. Yep. So I'm hoping you guys can see the screen that's loading up here. If you want to reduce your load time, make sure that you are not stowing away thousands of books like I am. It's one of those things where you have to make a trade-off of what you're going to be doing. So just be careful with how much stuff and content you're going to be using and sharing. Even though Unity is a lot more powerful nowadays, it still relies on the network that you're connected to. So if you have crappy bandwidth and you're trying to send large photos or maps across the network, it can be very tough because you are actually still the host of the game. The game is not hosted on the cloud. The cloud only facilitates the actual connection. Once the group is connected, everything is pretty much passed on to your server or to your computer. So you're hosting all of your players on your machine still. The handshaking process was taken over by the cloud. It just tries to maintain the connection. That's all it does. And it remembers it too. So that is something that, oh, you see my server on there? Yeah. Okay, so the main purpose, though, of this lesson is going to be to get you more familiarized. I mean, I've been yammering for about a half an hour, so we'll get into this and start actually poking around in Fantasy Grounds and pointing some things out. Now, when you first log into Fantasy Grounds, it's going to be pretty much a blank slate. It's pretty simple and laid out. You'll get a pop-up that comes up from the by default. I have it turned off, but I'll go ahead and put this back up because this is what you're going to see. This first little banner here is for you to have a direct connection to the wiki user guides, to the user manual, and to the forums. So this is like a help window. Once you hit next, this is where you start loading your content. And this is kind of a shortcut way of doing it. This is fairly new. This thing has only been out for maybe about a year and a half. Previous to that, you had to go to your library and do it all manually. Now it kind of has this little shortcut window. They were trying to make this process a little bit more user-friendly and intuitive. So you can click on modules, which will bring up everything that you have in your library. You can click on the SRD, which is going to load just the basic rules that I discussed earlier. And then if you have the core rules, let's say you have the Monster Manual, the Player's Handbook, and the Dungeon Master's Guide, it will load that if you want. If you own a bunch of rules, you can click on the 5e All Rules. I don't recommend doing that with your players connected, but if you're on your own, that's not too bad, but it takes it a few minutes to load all that content. I honestly think that's kind of a dangerous button there. If you don't have the memory, or if you're having too many other things going on in the background, it might freeze up Fantasy Grounds. But for the most part, it works pretty good. It just depends on your system and what you got going on. The modules button, again, it leads to the back end where you can manually load up content. And we're going to use this shortly. So what has happened is it's downloaded, or excuse me, it's already downloaded, but it's loaded up the module itself. And then the next step on here is clicking next, and this brings you to the options. So the options button is where you can change your settings. There are a ton of settings in here. I don't have time to go through all of them, but I will go through them as we need them. Initially, though, when you're first starting off, you're going to need to know a few of these buttons are. So to run Fantasy Grounds manually, like if you want to use real dice, you can turn on the manual dice entry. And what that does is you let your players roll physically. They give you the number. You put it in the dice roller in the pop-up, and then it basically will still do the math and such. So you can use this around the table and use a manual dice entry. It just adds another step to Fantasy Grounds. Another thing is people like changing this background image. So right now I have the one that's built into the theme, and that is called Desktop Decal Image. So right now it's on the book, or you can just go with the magic circle. You can actually right-click on an image that you have in your Images Assets folder, and you can actually create your own background. So if you have per se this image, and you go into your assets, that image that I just showed you was a map. If you go in your assets, and in this case, this would be an image, and this particular image is stored in the campaign. So there's the data level and the campaign level. This particular map is stored in the campaign level. So if I double click this is letting me preview the image. It can be a map, a handout, or just artwork, whatever you want. So you can set this as your background just for color and for immersion, or you can create an image record, which is going to add it to your pool of maps that you can use to share with your party members. So I think that's a cool feature that was just added recently. Before, you had to have an extension in order to change those. But now you can just right-click on an image in your assets, or you can go out into the preview area and have it assigned to your background graphic. And the other thing I have loaded, that was the Smiteworks logo. And then here's the Lost Mine stuff. So you have options. Generally, when I'm teaching or playing, I turn it off. But for the sake of for you guys to get an idea of what Fantasy Grounds can do, I'm just kind of showing you the different decals and such. Or again, you can make your own. I usually put a cheat sheet in the back. So like if I have new players, I have like a diagram that shows what they can do and such. So that's helpful too. So then there are some other settings such as the dice tower. Now, not everyone uses the dice tower, but if you want to use the dice tower during gameplay, one of the things you can do is enable the virtual dice tower. So if you click on this on button, it only shows it for your clients, for your players. And that's because when you pick up a dice and you roll it in the chat window, it's automatically hidden. They're not going to see that roll unless you choose to show it to them. Now, if you want to also use the dice tower like your players, there's a setting called Chat Show GM Rolls. If you turn that on, it turns on the dice tower, and the dice tower usually shows up here on the bottom right. So in order to move it, you have to right-click on it and unlock it, and then you can move it over to wherever you want to position it. In this case, I'll put it here by the dice. Right-click it and lock it. So now when I roll, if I want it to be secret, I have to also drop it in the dice tower. If I roll in the open with that setting up here changed, that roll is now visible. It's not hidden anymore. So it's just a matter of taste and how you run your table. So the next thing is I'm going to load up the Lost Mind of Phandelver module. And I might load something else. It depends on what I'm doing. So for the time being, if you want to only see what the content that you have loaded currently, if at all, you would click this load filter. And that just shows that I have these books loaded. And as you can see here, one of these has a check mark and these other two are X'd out. The one with the check mark means that it is shared amongst the group. So the bestiary and the magic items are commonly not shared, but if for some reason you wanted to, you can click on that and make it available for your players to access through Fantasy Grounds. Even if they own other content that you do not, it is up to you to allow it or not at your table. So they may have more things in their library than you. That's not always good, because if it comes down to leveling up your characters, then if you don't have that content, or if that person doesn't have their book open at the time, it can break the character, especially when it comes time to leveling up, when they start getting their archetype or any of the changes that are made incrementally. So those are things that you have to keep in mind when you're allowing content. The other thing is try to keep it low. You don't want 50,000 books open. Rarely do you need that. The only time that needs to probably happen is if you are building characters or something like that. And that's it. So that would be something that you want to find out and learn over time. And you'll get an idea of what's too much and what isn't enough. It all depends on your game and your resources and who's playing and how many players and how much bandwidth you have and those sort of things. So right now, this is what I have shared. So if I click on this loaded filter again, that just takes me to everything. So this has everything that I have in my system. And if you look here, I have a ton of content. So the content that I have here is a blend of stuff from the DM's Guild, stuff that I've created, and stuff that I purchased from the official store. So the stuff that comes from the store is encrypted. It's downloaded through the interface. You can't mess with it. The artwork is baked into it, that sort of thing. If you have third-party content, sometimes it's copyright protected. Most of the time it isn't. And if you're bringing in maps and tokens and such, you have more flexibility on what you can do with the content. The actual maps and images that come with the modules are baked in normally. And that means you can't really edit them or export them or do anything like that with them. So artwork is very heavily protected in Fantasy Grounds. So if you have a map from Storm Kings of Thunder and you want to edit it and do things to it, you're going to have to get something from a third party. So whoever the original author is, maybe Mike Schley or Jared Blando or whoever created the map, you would have to download it through his website, upload it into Fantasy Grounds, and edit it to your delight. But when you're in Fantasy Grounds and you're using the baked-in content, it doesn't let you modify or export or share it or anything like that with outside of Fantasy Grounds. So I have a lot of existential modules here, but for the time being, I'm going to just type in Lost Mine. And as you can see, it pulls up the module, so I'm going to go ahead and click Load. And the reason it went away, because it's on the filter here. So if I go back to my load filter, this is going to show what's loaded and what isn't. And then I also have to get rid of my criteria down here for my search terms. Now there's a module here that was put out third party that allows you to have more options for loot to give out to your players. So if you wanted to load a third party thing, I go ahead and hit load. And then once I hit the load filter, it'll show everything I have loaded. Technically, Lost Mine is written to be run by itself without a bunch of rules. If you have just the SRD and Lost Mine, just the one module, technically you can run this without anything else. So it's a self-contained module, which is kind of nice for, especially if you're new and you don't want to go out and buy a bunch of stuff. But you really are limited on character generation. That's usually where the limit is. So it has 5 pre-gens, but if you wanted to build something from scratch, you wouldn't have as many options or things to work with. So that's why it's handy to have the player's handbook and the basic rules loaded. It gives you some options. The player's handbook definitely is almost a must. If you want Xanathars and all those other ones, you can collect those in time. You don't have to have everything right at once. So this is how you manage your data. This is how you load your content. This is how you share and unshare the modules. This is how you filter out what you have loaded, what you don't have loaded. So this is your library. On the right-hand side, you have all these little options here. Right now, it defaults to the host mode or GM mode. Right now, I'm in Game Master mode because I'm the host. This is the default. But if you want to change this view, you go into the options menu and you click sidebar. And here you can customize what's displayed. And then there's some presets. So if you want to see everything, you click on all, and that puts everything out here. If you want to just have Game Master mode like we were in before, you'd click that. If you're just a player and you already have your character built, you're in play mode. And if you're going to create a PC, you have a few more options and you'll be in the character creation mode. So there's 3 different basic modes, and then you can clear it and you can add just the ones you want. So it's customizable. I think for the sake of this particular seminar, though, I'm going to leave it on Game Master. That gives us what we need to know. In the library, once you have a book loaded, most of the D&D 5e official content has a what you call reference manual. So when you click on one of these books, most of the time you'll see a reference manual. Now this book here doesn't have a reference manual. It is not an official source, but it does have the things needed. It's just a matter of having a book that's embedded in Fantasy Grounds as opposed to just a module. So when you look at something that's baked in, like these pre-gen characters, these are characters that are designed to be used and they're balanced for this module. Now you can create your own content, but again, you have to have at least a player's handbook or some sort of reference book. But if you don't have that and you want to run something right away and you don't want to go out and spend a bunch of money and just to test it out, this is a good way to do it. So these are all first level characters that are built for this module. And if you go to the character selection window, I already have them loaded here for the sake of time. but you would click on these green plus buttons and they would appear over here on the right hand side. And then you get a message in the chat window that will indicate that those pre-gens have been added to your campaign. It doesn't tell you which ones, it just says your pre-gen was added. I wish it would tell you which one, but it doesn't. So this is how you would get to your pre-gens if you have it in your module. There's only a few that have them. This module, which is Lost Mine, the Essentials, D&D Essentials has them, and the Stranger Things box set. Most of all the other adventures do not have pre-gens built into them. And that's generally because people want to make their own or they ignore them anyway. So they don't do it very often. But you can make your own pre-gens, which is kind of nice. So once you have content loaded, you can go through it like a book. So for instance, Lost Mine, there was the pre-gens that we looked at. It has encounters, random encounters, images. So those kind of match these things over on the right-hand side as far as, you know, what's in what content is in there and what categories. But reference manuals can only be accessed through the library itself. And this is the actual content, the actual book. So if you want to know what you're paying for, not only are you getting the modular view of all this stuff, you're also getting the digital copy of the book. So here you have your preface for the module, which has some artwork. What's really nice about this is you can pop this page out. It's almost like a copy of this, and you can drag and drop it into the hotkey. So if you want to come back to this page later, or maybe when you pop this image up, you want to share it with your players, whatever, you can do that. The other nice thing is the navigation arrows on the bottom. Once you click this, it'll turn the page in the reference manual or in that image, and it'll go through this just like a book. You can read it, you can browse it, you can use the direction arrows to go forward. You can skip to different parts in the chapters, which is handy. It has the maps embedded in here. So technically you can run this as a virtual tool just around a table physically when we're able to do that again. So if you have a face-to-face people, you can still use it just like you would around a table with books, but you would be using a laptop probably to facilitate the screen, and then you might hook up your laptop to a big, huge television or whatever you want to use to run it, and still use dice and everything else. So there's really not a whole lot of difference there other than just having this digital version and not having to lug around a big backpack full of books. So I think this is a good way to go. When I was telling you earlier about using Fantasy Grounds versus other tabletops, my biggest thing was I was able to take Fantasy Grounds camping. I got 2 batteries, and I had one in the laptop already, an extended battery, and I had them all charged up, and we went up camping, and I just had like a 17-inch monitor, and I ran this whole weekend with pre-printed character sheets, and I just kept track of everything on Fantasy Grounds, and I used the books in there, and I didn't have to do a whole lot, and I didn't have to lug around a suitcase full of books, so it was pretty handy. And then there's a lot less, losing dice and stuff. So players were losing dice, but I wasn't. So that was one of the selling points for me, was I was able to take this camping with me fairly effectively and not have to worry about internet, and I didn't have to worry about power so much. I could actually charge the battery from the car, but I had 3 battery packs with me, so that was plenty for a weekend. So we played for about 3 hours every night, getting bit up by mosquitoes, but we had a good time. We sat out by the fire. It was beautiful. So this is why I like Fantasy Grounds over a lot of the other platforms. The other thing is the way it's organized is pretty decent. It's really not always intuitive, but once you understand what it does and how it works, it is wonderful. So you can skip around in chapters. You can go back and forth in these pages, and there's an appendix, and you got your tables, and there's images in there, and then you have a search bar. So if you wanted to look up what languages are available in this setting, so it doesn't have a lot of content, but if you click on monsters, there must be a mention of languages in here. So it's just a matter of what content you have. If I had the player's handbook, I'd get all kinds of stuff. So this just gives you a really nice tool to be able to utilize your content that you're purchasing, the digital books, and you can use it in a couple different ways. It's a lot more flexible than just having the books or just having the D&D Beyond content. Because if you don't have cell service or anything like that, you're SOL. There's no going back on it. So that's one of the biggest selling points for me for this type of tool. The other thing is I really like community. All right, so now that we have an understanding of the library and what comes in there and how you access it, is there any questions on organize the desktop so it's more functional and easier to use? And you guys are welcome to talk. You don't have to be silent unless you want to. So going once, going twice. Okay. So the next step is Windows management and placement of things on your virtual tabletop. This is where a lot of people get frustrated. I am included in this, a lot of people. I learned early on from the Digital Dungeon Master and other people that played before me that your Windows placement is very important. These are something that you don't realize when you're first playing until you really start getting into it. And you go, God, this is a hassle. I hate this. And it gets frustrating. And I guarantee you're going to go through it at least once. But you'll remember me telling you this, is that Fantasy Grounds is a way to organize your information. It allows you to present data. The more efficient and more it all the way through, it is going to be difficult. And you'll get good at it, but it'll still just feel not quite right. So I want you to get used to the idea of placing your windows or your assets before you start playing, if you can help it. So in other words, when you first get Fantasy Grounds, it looks like this, except for I added the dice tower. You can right-click on the background here where the chat window is, and you can actually stretch this however you like. So in this case, I'm only going to go to about here, and then I leave this spot up here for players when they actually join the table, because that's where they'll appear. And then I'll shrink this a little bit because it doesn't need to be that tall vertically. That's probably a good start. And I usually match it up with the combat tracker, which is the next piece of this, another important piece. So this next piece is basically the combat tracker, which is these two swords up on the top right. This is basically your view of your combat and rounds and keeping track of spell durations and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to take these off temporarily just so I can have a kind of a way to illustrate what's going on here. So right now I've taken and changed all the factions to neutral. And if I go to the menu and I click delete, I can delete non-friendlies and it gets rid of everything. That's a quick way to clear the combat tracker. When you start a campaign and you have things going on there, you don't want to do that. But when you're using this for instruction or building characters and such, this is a really nice feature to make things faster. The other thing is I usually stretch this down a little bit because as you add combatants and players on here, this thing loads up pretty quick. So one of the things I teach in the Game Master classes is split up your encounters. If you have 10 goblins and you put those on the combat tracker, it really bogs things down and it just takes forever to scroll up and down this combat tracker. So I'll break that up into 2 encounters. I'll have 5 of them show up the first round and let a couple of those die off or do what they need to do. And then maybe in the 3rd round, I'll introduce the other half of the encounter. That way it's staged and there's a lot less confusion and you'll have a lot less things going on in the combat tracker. Because if you load something in there, it's like 50 tokens or whatever. It's really hard on your players and on yourself to try to manage it. So I usually try to cut down my encounters. I cut them in half. Like if it's like a boss and like 8 goblins, I might say, okay, I'm going to put 2 goblin bodyguards and a boss together. So that's 7. And then I'll have, or actually there'll be 8, including the boss. And then I'll break those up into 2 encounters of 4 each. That way I'm not constantly scrolling up and down here. And it also allows me a better visibility as to how the party's doing. And you don't have this surprise round. We got all these like 50 different assailants attacking one person at once. I mean, this is a better way to manage the combats. And we'll get into that a little bit more later, but I'll show you what that looks like. So this is where my combat tracker is placed. This is where the chat window is. Here's the dice tower. I left this little inch space up here so that whoever connects to the table, I can see who's connected. And then the next thing is the party sheet. So the party sheet is a valuable tool. It's just part of these two things, the combat tracker and the party sheet, are probably your best friends. I think they're one of the best things that Fantasy Grounds does as a VTT. I like the way it works. I like how it's linked together. And when you put characters on the combat tracker, they link to the map. It does a lot of cool things. So that's our next thing is we're going to bring up the characters. So assuming that you've added them or you've built them or you can import them. So if you have other campaigns, you can click on the import character button. You can pull in characters from other sessions or other games that you've run. So you're not singled out for one specific game or one specific session. So here I could technically add any of these other characters that I built for other sessions. But in this case, I won't do that. You can also export your character. So what I usually recommend is once your characters have built their characters and they played around with this first level character, right before they level up to level 2, I will export the character by clicking on the edit list, and then you click this down arrow and you can actually export the character and put it in a folder somewhere safe. Name it aptly. Cleric Soldier isn't going to tell you a whole lot. So you'd probably want level 1 Cleric X and X, so-and-so's name or whatever, so that you remember what it's for. Because this is not going to be very good, because I might have 20 of these called with the same title. So you can only export and import one at a time. There's no way to batch do it, unfortunately. But that is a way to manage your characters. Another thing about characters is when your players come on the table, they're going to select which character they want. Unfortunately, when they pick one of these, they're going to claim it, and it kind of takes it off the table for the rest of the people. So the only way for them to actually recourse is to right-click, and you can release or clear the owner, and it becomes available for your other players. So there's not a good way to preview characters before you select them. That's one thing I think they can improve on with Fantasy Grounds. It's just mainly the beginnings. When you get into a campaign and you got 5 people that want a character, and you're constantly managing this. I think it'd be better if either A, you had more to pick from, and B, a better way to preview them without actually claiming them. And I think that's an important function that's missing. But nonetheless, we'll pretend that these are the 5 that you either made or imported or whatever. So I'm going to drag each one of these into the combat tracker. Again, there's no way to do it en masse or in mass or trying to do it in bulk. But as they're being built or when they are built, you can drag them over here. And now they're starting to become part of your campaign. So now these are your player characters. And then your party sheet is the next step. So you're going to drag each one of these onto the party sheet. And once that's happened, they're part of your campaign. A little caveat to this is you generally don't want to put in animals or, temporary players. You might put a sidekick on here if you plan on leveling them up. But anything that's like a guest or, someone that's just popping through for a couple sessions, you really don't want to add them to the party sheet, because this is where you break down your loot and your experience points, and you do all kinds of things with that. So it's better to not put them on here if you can help it. It's not a no-no or taboo or anything. It's just... Caesar? I'm going to have to mute you, sir. All right. Sorry about that, folks. Caesar, I don't mind if you watch, but you had a live open mic. So, All right, so the next thing is to kind of, we'll go through this party sheet more in depth, but the first part of this is the setup, and that's to add them to it. There's another group here called order, and you can use this to kind of illustrate who is on watch first. So maybe this folk fighter, maybe he's first watch. The human guy, soldier, noble guy is the second watch. And all this does is it establishes a watch order. You can also put them in pairs, so if you can double up on the numbers. And then this marching formation here is kind of a way for you to show when you don't have a map or any sort of source material to illustrate what you're doing. You can use this as a tool to kind of show where people are in relation to each other. Like if you want to do theater of the mind, or just like the old days when you used graph paper, this would be the way to do it. The reason I use it is not for, I usually use a battle map or I'll use a different image, but I'll use this for height and elevation. So if you wanted to pretend like these guys are up here in the boat, and this guy, maybe this rogue is swimming underwater, you can use it for that to kind of display or to show height and elevation. Because when you're using a top-down virtual tabletop without having a fancy extension or some kind of tool that does that for you, you're not going to know how far up in the air or how deep in the water they are. So I just usually say that each square is 10 feet, and then I just wing it from there. So this targeting thing isn't going to be as accurate as people are in the y-axis, or the z-axis. So you have x and y, but you don't have z, which is the third dimension that you're looking for. So that's what I use this for. You can use it for however you want, but that's what this is, kind of the usage of it. It's a drawing tool. You access it by right-clicking and going into drawing. And I can actually erase everything in one click, or I can right-click and go back into drawing and draw out some stuff. So you kind of use this as a tool to help you with run your games, especially if you don't have maps or you don't use them. This will give you a better idea where things are at. And you can share this particular tab with your players. So if you want to show this to them, you can go into options, and you would go into the settings here, where in this case it says party, show characters to clients. I don't really like the way that's titled, but if you turn that on, your players will be able to access this tab. And the other tab you can share is the inventory tab, which is here, where it's on the right here, where you can buy, sell, and trade items. And we'll get into this later. But those are the two tabs that you can share on the party sheet. The main tab is not shareable, and the experience award thing is not shareable, but the other two tabs are. And that's up to you. Usually when I'm in the inventory area, once they've done their buying and selling and trading, I'll turn that off because I really don't want them studying this and goofing around. And I might even turn off that little 3D map thing, or the map side of it, because people will just end up moving things around. They just goof around, so it just drives me nuts. So I'll lock that down when we're not using it, and then when I need it, I'll just pop it back up. So if you're worried about that, that's something you can do to help mitigate that. All right, so that's the party sheet, and generally when that party sheet is up and running, I want it to be compact and down in this right corner. That's where I want this to show up when I click on it. So if I want to dismiss it and I need the space down here, you don't move your windows out of the way, you close them. And this is where a lot of people go wrong with Fantasy Grounds. So the party sheet, I don't want it anymore. Okay, you close it. If you want to open it again, you come up to the top right, click on the party sheet, and it will come back. So I'm just repeatedly clicking on this just to show you. Same thing with this combat tracker. If you need that space back here, and you use the space, and then you close this, guess where it's coming back to? It's going to go back where you left it. So if I click, so get used to dismissing the items and then calling them back up, either from the up here or from one of your shortcuts below. If you keep moving the windows around, you're going to drive yourself nuts. And that's probably the biggest part of this lesson, is the Windows management is a huge thing. So leave them where you want them to be. And you won't really know that right away, but eventually you're going to find out where you want stuff to show up. And once you have it placed where you want it, leave it there. Don't move it. And when you come back to this game, and these are all closed, all you have to do is click on that. It goes right where it was. You can click on that. It goes right where it was. Or if you can, even if you have a shortcut, you can put that in the hotkeys and click down there on some of your windows, and it'll pop up where you left it. So that's probably the most important piece of this, is that you get to learn how to manage the table. We haven't even got into the game part of it. We're getting into the interface and how you should manage it or think about managing it, and also the benefit of doing it this way as opposed to just kind of randomly doing it. So is there any questions? Because we're going to start getting into the relationship of the windows once I get through this. Okay. I like it. So this is something that you need to learn. This is a very important part of Fantasy Grounds. If you don't gain anything else, I think this would probably be the best piece of it, is that you're going to learn how to manage the windows. And you want to get out of the bad habits of moving them back and forth and those sort of things. That's what really slows your game down. So I'm going to go ahead and close the party sheet window for now. I don't need it. I'll leave the combat tracker up because this is generally where I leave it and it's not in the way. And I have almost 2/3 of my screen here available to me. And this is at 80% scaling. So before I even came in here, I scaled it down to 80%. And what'll happen though is your little text gets smaller, so you got to be careful with that. So any lower than 80, your little characters get pretty small. Okay, so now the other thing is, how are these things related? How you want to lay your table out? So there's ways to organize your campaign, and there's ways to manage it so that it's not going to be such a hassle. So I'm going to first talk about the relationship of the module to the interface and to the, where things are at. So in the library, as you remember, I have the adventure, the SRD, and the supplement. When you start calling up these different sections, you have your character panel, which I'd probably leave there and then close it. So next time it comes up, that's where it's going to be. Oh, man, I'm a liar. It didn't show up where I wanted it. Maybe that's an exception to the rule. Dom. Yeah, it doesn't. So that sucks. So that's the only one that I can say that doesn't. For notes, I'm going to have that probably down in here somewhere. And this is where I would, start organizing my campaign when I'm ready. But the modules themselves, so if I go back to the library view and you look at your content, some of these are not going to have some of these groups over here. So it depends on what's in it. This is the heart of everything. Most, if not all, content is going to have a story entry. Whether it's one page or several chapters, there's probably at least going to be one. For the next thing is images and maps. So these are your handouts. These are your, pictures of NPCs and maps and DM maps, player maps. All that stuff is stored in the images and maps. So these, I would say, these two are the most important or the most used. The rest of them are kind of tertiary. So you have, for instance, we have our NPCs. So this is your non-playing characters. These are your monsters. These are traps. These are vehicles. So in 5th edition, that's how they do it. Any type of hazard or trap or vehicle, anything that you want to put hit points on, basically, is going to be in NPCs. Now, in Fantasy Grounds, NPCs make up encounters. So the next piece of this puzzle here is the encounters. So these make up the encounters. So an encounter consists of NPCs. It has your CR rating and your XP depending on what the item is. This is an open pit, so it's really not a creature. It's a trap. And when you open this up, it's pretty generic, except for it has the notes for if you fall, you have to make a DC challenge rating or be knocked prone. So it actually has the syntax built in. So once this, let's say this human, let's say he falls in that trap, it said a DC 15 challenge rating. So maybe we can do athletics. It says a strength check, so we'll do it. Oh, it does say athletics in parentheses. So if we go to his skills tab, and I want him to roll out the open, because this is a physical thing. People should be able to see this. So he didn't notice the trap. I'm going to drag and drop this just right down in the chat area. He rolled a 12, but he has a +5. So he rolled a 17. He avoided the trap. However, if he had rolled lower, this trap has the check notes here, and it says if you fail by 5 or more, you fall and take damage, and you're knocked prone. So even if he failed, let's say he rolled a 12 or something like that, he would probably be okay. He would just be falling down the hole. But it says if you fail by 5 or more, then you would have to roll for damage. And see, this isn't written correctly, but what I would have done is I would have taken this and made this trait a damage, an actual damage that I can drag and drop onto the character. But there's the prone property, and I can drag and drop that on him. And that gives him the penalties or whatever it is that comes with that in Fantasy Grounds. So whoever wrote this, they wrote it as just one statement. And it just says it takes I, so the letter I, D6. Let me change that to a 1. Now, when you parse it, it'll actually roll the damage. So whoever wrote this had a typo, and that's all it takes for this to become broken. So whoever wrote this open pit trap, I don't even know what this goes to. It says a cave entrance. But whatever that was, either that was a problem with the PDF, because quite often when you copy PDFs, you're going to get weird characters. And in this case, it was the letter I instead of a 1. So it didn't parse the information. So that means I would have had to manually add the roll and then manually take it away from the fighter, which isn't a problem. It's not a big deal. It's just that if you're going to have a virtual tabletop that can do this type of stuff, you might as well use it. So I have the bludgeoning damage and the prone condition ready to go instead of having to manually do it. So that is a little typo here. And when you get into creating content for Fantasy Grounds, you're going to find out how frustrating that is, especially if you're copying and pasting from a PDF. If the wording isn't correct or they have a strange character in there or an extra space or whatever it is, Fantasy Grounds will not parse it. And that is something you'll learn in more advanced classes. I won't have a lot of time to go through that, but I'm glad that showed up because you kind of see how annoying that could be. If you're playing in the middle of the game and you wanted to drag the damage and just let it roll, that sort of thing, that's where Fantasy Grounds can break if you're creating content. So back to this. So your NPCs and encounters. Then you have your items, which is your gear, weapons, magic items, everything. And then you have, and even gems and anything that's not a coin. And then you have parcels, which I really never liked that name. I always thought treasure would have made more sense, but that's basically what that is a treasure loot thing. I understand what a parcel is, but in D&D speak, how often do you say a parcel? Unless you play Fantasy Grounds, rarely. The next thing is tables. So this is your randomization. You can create content like this. If their tables are set up correctly, you can roll random loot, all kinds of, you can make up stories. You can have like a rumor table. The tables are a lot of fun in Fantasy Grounds. And then you have your quest item, which would be like a milestone or a goal. Like you entered the castle and rescued the princess. Maybe that's worth 500 experience that you distribute amongst the party. So quest items are kind of more story-oriented. Is that a word? Story-oriented. And then encounters are more of the combat side of things. So when you finish an encounter, you click and drag this onto the party sheet. And then when you finish the milestone or the goal in the story, you drag this also to the party sheet. And then it awards and splits it up automatically. So these are the groups that are in a campaign. There are other groups that are more related to character building. I don't have those showed right now because that's not the focus of this seminar. That would be building custom content for the characters themselves. This is more for like running a campaign and understanding where the things are and how they're related. So NPCs and encounters go together. Items and parcels go together. Images, stories, these are kind of related. The tables and the quests are kind of little side things. So those are what makes up a campaign or a setting. Most campaigns or settings for the 5th edition rule sets, the official ones, contain all of these. Not all of them, most of them. So a good setting, if you have all this stuff, you're getting a pretty good product because you're not just getting a story or some tables, you're getting pretty much a little bit of everything. So now you need to learn how to sort what data you do have. So in the library, all this content loaded, and most of you are probably going to have even more, is you want to learn how to use these groups. So a group will drop down, and I'm going to go to the NPCs for Lost Mine, because that's the module we're about to run. And then for the encounters, they have it broken down into chapters, so I'm just going to worry about Chapter 1, and these are all story-driven encounters. Then for tables, they don't really get into it till Part 3. And what this table is basically a frequency table for encounters out in the wilderness. And I'll show you that stuff later. Quest items, these are your milestones and goals or events that you've completed. So there's another group. And then for stories, it's broken into chapters, so I'll go to the first part. I don't skip right to the content. I usually look at the preface and the background and all that first, and then unless you know the story already. And then of course the images and maps, it's broken down into artwork, it's broken down into NPCs, it's broken down into maps. So Lost Mine comes with its own maps, player map and DM map. It has its own artwork, so I'm going to go ahead and click on artwork. So it just depends on what you need to do with it. And then for items, same thing, but they have it broken down to mundane items and then magic items. So I'm just going to go to the mundane, regular standard gear. And then for parcels, that's just set up for treasure throughout the adventure. So do you guys understand the filter part of this? That's kind of important to know what your content you're looking at. If you need to borrow or take something from, like, let's say the monster manual, and it's not part of your campaign, but you want to add it, all you'd have to do is go back to all, or you would select the monster manual. So you'd have to unfilter it in some cases. Unfortunately, Fantasy Grounds does not save these filters. So if you leave Fantasy Grounds, come back, if for some reason you need to refilter them, you'll have to do it again. It doesn't save this. And it's probably because when you unload a module or if you don't play it, it's just another thing that can break. So I think they leave it as a default as all. So when you come back to Fantasy Grounds, it'll always say all instead of where you left off last. I think that's both good and bad. I think if you're new and you didn't know any better and you were stuck in the bestiary, you say, hey, where's all my other monsters? So that may be why they didn't do it. So anyhow, this is how the things are related in regards to Fantasy Grounds and how it's formatted. A lot of this stuff now these are links, and on the top left of just about everything in Fantasy Grounds, you have a link. So if you want to link something, you can link it down to the hotkeys. You can link it to a story entry. You can link it to a map. There's so many different ways that you can link things together. It's very handy once you understand how that works, that functionality. it makes this game a lot quicker and easier. So to remember this, think of this as the robot. So we got our arms here, our legs, the heart of the story. You got your arms over here and your shoulders. So if you remember this stupid thing, you'll remember that. So this is just how I remember it. It's like a robot looking thing. So it's just a matter of getting used to where things are and how to filter them, and using these filters down below too to narrow down your search. You can also create content in here. So if you want to create your own stories or tables or NPCs, or bring in your own images, or write your own stories, or make your own items, or even build your own treasure parcels, this is where you would do that. And then usually you'll want to make your own group. So right now these are their own groups from the different sources they're from. But in the images and maps, I made one called My Maps. And then this has this map that I was showing the other day in it. And this is a map that I was putting line of sight on and such. So right now it's dark because I don't have possession of any of these characters. But if I click on a token, I can see the map. I even added this rain. I excluded the rain from any of the buildings that are inside. It looks like I didn't get those. But the mist isn't going inside the building, so you can decide where this fog or mist is going to come from. And then I just kind of was showing how the relationship between the map and the map tools. We won't have a lot of time for that today, but we do this, but not a bunch. Because that would be another 2-hour class. I don't think we have enough time to cover that. But anyhow, so we'll cover things as they come up. But this is basically the organization of the data. It's in the library view, in the actual book, in the reference manual. So you have it that way. And then when you click on the book itself, as you can see, you have encounters, random encounters, images, magic items, NPCs, parcels, quests, stories. So they kind of match up with this stuff here. So that's how it's organized in Fantasy Grounds. So these are related. So like NPCs, if I bring this up, it's going to be similar to the modular view, except for you cannot alter these. These are mainly for reference. So you can pop these up and read them, but they're embedded into usually you can't unlock them, so they would be embedded in the story, and you can't really do much with them. So you either have to make a copy of it, or you have to create your own content. So that's generally what people do, is they'll just make a copy of it within Fantasy Grounds. So those are all the different pieces of the DM view as far as the content goes. Kind of the, how things are related, where the stuff is, how it's stored, how it's sorted and organized. So now what I need to do is I have players, I have my module loaded, I have an idea of the content that I have, I know how things are related. Now I'm going to start preparing for my campaign. So I'd like all of you to take a break. Let's come back let's be back here by 30 after. Is that fair? I'd like all of you to take a 10, 12-minute break. Use the restroom, get some water, go check on your dog. Okay, so we'll come back and then we'll start getting into how to run the adventure and all that good stuff. So let's take a quick break, and I'll see you guys soon.
Keep detuning this, man.
All right, folks, we're back. Any questions before we start getting into this? There's a lot of material covered. Anybody confused or need some sort of backtracking or of anything? This, by the way, so if you guys want to go back and watch it, you can. And I'm also running. Anybody here want to backtrack or go over anything? I am recording this for prosperity's sake, and if you guys, I'll upload it to YouTube, and you guys can go back and watch it later, or we can. You guys can also watch the stream tomorrow. I'm going to do another one at 4 or at noon Central, and it'll be on the Blighted Lands channel. There'll be less people in that stream, but it'll be on the actual Twitch channel, the official one. So if you miss this content, there'll be more. And of course, you can join the Fantasy Grounds College community, and you can request links on our website. It's fantasygroundscollege.net. You can join classes and all kinds of stuff. So it's something that we do year-round. We're in our 4th year now. Our 4th year celebration will be in July. So we've been doing this for a while. No questions. Okay. So remember... Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
A real quick question.
Sure.
I know you said earlier about using it offline.
Yes.
You're going to project it onto a larger screen.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to do it where you could use a laptop with the GM view on your end?
It all depends on how you have your hardware set up. Some laptops and computers will allow you to have multiple outputs. So if you have a computer like that, you can just use your regular screen and then route the other one out to your widescreen. It just depends on your output on your computer.
Okay, I just didn't know if you could have both the GM version on the laptop and then a player version on the other.
You totally could.
Okay,
you can start up a demo account and have it connect to the table, and just kind of use that as your dummy screen. Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
It's doable. And if you're not sure how exactly that's done, there are videos and stuff in the forums about explaining how to do it. It's really not that bad, though. Okay, so we have our party members. We loaded up the party sheet. I'm kind of giving you a little bit of an idea of how the stuff is connected. Now this is where your feet hit the pavement now. So right now we have the party members up here. There's 5 people, and I don't know who half of them are. I might know 2 or 3 of them. So I want to organize the campaign so that it's much easier for me to digest. I think one of the mistakes newer game masters, or even people who have been around for a while, they kind of get overwhelmed by, okay, you got this module, you got this cover, you got these maps, there's all this stuff. Well, you don't have to know the entire module, although it is preferred. You need to read a little, and if you want to minimize the amount of reading you do, just kind of take it in bites. You don't have to read the entire module the first day you buy it. There are things that may come up later in the module that would make more sense in the beginning. That's probably the most common reason why you'd want to read ahead. And then there's maybe some trade-offs or some kind of events that won't make sense as you go through the modules. So you can throw those out, pretty much do whatever you want story-wise. But to make things easier in Fantasy Grounds, I have a methodology that I teach, extra work up front, but it really, really helps when it comes to running the game. So the first thing I do is the characters. Once I have them built and they are pretty much fleshed out, I'm going to go ahead and take all of them and put them in this spot where I have them right now. And then I change this tab on the right on their character sheet to combat and actions, because that's where they're going to be when they're playing most of the time. And then same thing here. So I'm just going to layer all of these characters in one place. I don't want them spread out across the screen. I don't want them randomly popping up. So if you have some character that's way over here, or that's like this or something, just tidy it up, put it over here in a pile, and put them all in one spot. That really helps you a lot to organize where they're going to be when they pop up and where you want them to be. So this is basically a way for you to help yourself make the game run smoother, especially if you have new players and you need to look at their sheets and stuff to see what's going on. This would be a good way to achieve that. So I've taken the liberty of taking all these and manually stretching them and placing them where I want them to go. And then I'll switch over to the Actions tab and make sure that the mode's on Combat and Actions. That way I can see what's going on. And then I will go through each character and systematically do this until I get them all in place. Once I've done that, now when I click on this, on the combat tracker, I don't know if you guys can see that, the pink ring there. Is that bright enough for you guys to see? I don't know if you guys see that. I got a pointer, so hopefully it helps. Anyhow, on the right-hand side of the combat tracker, those little buttons there, that's a shortcut to the characters. So if I click on that, it brings up the characters in the spot that I have assigned. So no matter what, I can click on that and get to the characters. And also, when it comes up to their turn on the combat tracker, it's very easy for me to access that without having to move things around. So that right there alone is going to save you a bunch of hassle and headache. Once in a while, you'll have to stretch the characters out a little bit more to read stuff, but for the most part, you can leave them kind of tall and narrow like this. I do the same thing for the NPC. So when I get to that point, when I add them to the table, I will stretch them and layer them right in the same place, depending on the encounter I have set up. So that's one thing I do to kind of make things a little easier on myself. The next thing is I will actually start building some notes. So your notes is just a separate tool. The notes are contained within the campaign. You don't export them or anything like that. They're not part of a module. They're just basically part of this session. So I'm going to click on Notes, which is over here on the right. Pop this window open. And on the bottom, there's a little plus button, or you can right-click and add a new item. So right-click is your best friend in Fantasy Grounds. So if you don't know where something is, right-click on something and you'll find it. So now I have this blank note. So I'm going to call this my Lost Mine of Phandelver. We'll call it Session 0. Okay, this is just for me. Now I'm going to take and open up the calendar view. And to get to the calendar, when you first open it, you won't have the calendar active, but it'll take you to the module section, and there's a module called Calendars. It's built into Fantasy Grounds. It's part of Fantasy Grounds. When you open it up, you'll get a selection of different calendars from different worlds. There's one for Barovia. There's one for was it Glorian or I don't know what that is in Pathfinder, but they have their own world, and then they have all the different. They have Plains or Dark Sun and all these other rule sets, even Dragonlance. So they have once you pick the calendar, and then you'll get this view of the calendar. You can use this for in-game, or you can use this for in-game calendar use. I use it for a regular calendar. I picked the Gregorian calendar, which is the one that we're using now in real life. And I'm going to go ahead and say the 25th, which is today. I'm going to go ahead and click on that day. And to set the calendar, you put in the year and the era. And then if you want to set the time, you click on an hour, and then you hold down the right control key, and you move forward or backwards. So I'll go ahead and put that at 6 p.m. just for illustration's sake. Once you've done that, you want to click on the Set Calendar, and it will move or advance to that day, and it keeps the time and everything in the year. But now we're on this actual day. So what I'm going to do is double click on this. And this is a blank kind of a journal calendar entry. What I'm going to do right away is, first of all, I'm going to link my notes into this area. And then I'm going to link this calendar entry into my notes. So what that does is no matter what, if I accidentally close this, then it comes up here. And if I close that, it comes up here. So that links those two together. And then on the player side, they have access to calendar too, but they only see the player side of this. So here's session 0. So they can put their own notes in here as players. And then I can put my notes in here and I can see both sides of this. So it's kind of like a journal entry. And then my session notes are going to be for me when I want the stuff I want to look at and study and keep track of. So these are just, preparation things that I do for the game. And then in the calendar, you also have the time. So there's a little chat bubble. So I can set this time into the chat. I can also set the date into the chat. This is readable to the players. And if I want to add this to my notes, which I will, I'm going to go ahead and grab the text itself. So there's the time. Or if I wanted to put it in the journal, now you may not have to do this, but I'm just saying that you can drag and drop text from different areas. Also, there's a new feature that is included in Fantasy Grounds that used to be a third-party extension. Pretty excited about it. It's not that big of a deal, but it's pretty handy if you like this sort of thing. So if you go into options, there's a message of the day. So this used to be something that you had to load externally. Now it's part of this actual interface. So then you just drag and drop the time if you want. Like the start time, you put the date, and then you can also put in whatever happened last week. And when your players come to your table to log in, that will pop up. So when they log on the table and they claim their character from the characters list, that message of the day will automatically pop up. They can dismiss it at that point, but at least they have something to look at before the game starts. So that means you can open up your table 2 hours ahead of time. They come on the table, that's what they read. They can look over their characters, switch their spells out, whatever prep they need to do before the game starts. And that's a handy little tool there, a communication tool. The other thing I'm going to do for myself to make this a little bit more convenient is I'm going to drag over all the characters that are in this party onto my cheat list here. Because I don't really know anybody just yet. So I'm dragging and dropping each one of these onto the Lost Mine of Fendover Session 0 notes. The reason I'm doing this, because after each one of these names, I'm going to put their Discord name, their phone number, their address, the name of their first kid, whatever it takes for me to get to know who they are and to remember who's who. And that's why I put those there. Another thing is, if I'm here and none of these sheets are open, like when I first start Fantasy Grounds, if I'm looking at my notes and I start clicking on these little buttons, they'll also come up in the same place I left them. And that's kind of handy. So if I don't want all the sheets open at once, let's say that one of the guys emailed me and says, "Hey, take a look at my rogue. Let me know what you think of all the changes I made." I can bring that up. I'll know which person it was, and I can go through his sheet and see what's going on. So this is just a kind of a more of a convenience thing. You don't have to do this, but it really helps. So these are my players. So this is the date, the journal entry, the players that are going to play at the table. And now I'm going to actually get into the module part of this. So this is just the organizational part of it. Now I'm going to take and put in the actual stuff that I need to read before session 1. So I'm going to go to the story entry. I've already filtered it. If you remember earlier, I filtered this list to the first part of it. So this is my research that I'm going to do. So once you get to reading through these, kind of browsing through, the first thing that sticks out is the background. So this tells you why and what and how things became the way they are. So this is your history. The next thing is I'm going to take a look at the overview. So this tells you how the module runs from front to back. So that's why I like this particular module, because it does this. Not all modules have this built into it. So this is nice. And honestly, if I was going to write my own adventures, this is exactly the way I'd do it. I might leave out a few things, but for the most part, this is the way I would prepare the module for my consumers or whoever's buying it. Then once I have the overview, it gives you a adventure hook, which is basically how the party members come together or how you start off the story. You don't have to use the one they give you, but if you do, it's a lot simpler. They give you a starting location. They give you some notes on how you should role play or encourage role play. It even gives you an idea of what you're going to do in the module as far as getting from A to B. So it says you can let them invent their own reasons for visiting Phandalin, or you can use the following adventure hook. The backgrounds or the secondary goals on the character sheets are baked into this adventure. So if you go to a character sheet and you read the notes in the back where they have the story, it'll tell you what the relationship is to this particular setting. I think that's a nice thing for story. And I think it's a good way to bring immersion into the story and give them something to tie them into the background of the setting. It's not critical you do that right away, but I think it's an important part of the game. If you have the time and you're not rushed, you can work with each player and really build up an elaborate backstory. But you don't want it to be too big because you won't leave a lot of room for growth or improvement or for changes. But you do want something to go on, and I think that's a really cool thing with role-playing games. And then it says they start in the city of Neverwinter. Their patron, his name is Gundren Rockseeker, if you guys have never heard of it before. He is a friend or an associate of them. He hires them to escort a wagon to Phandalin. Gundren has gone ahead with a warrior named Sildar Hallwinter. They're attending business in the town while you guys follow them with the supplies. And you're given an ox cart with some gear and some supplies, and they give you the value, and they tell you it's pulled by 2 oxen. So you're going kind of the slow boat. The characters will be paid 10 gold each by the owner of Barathan's provisions in Phandalin when they deliver the wagon safely to the trading post. So then it opens up the quest, and it says here, this is a quest item or a milestone, that we have agreed to escort a wagon of goods. Our friend is Gundren Rockseeker. He's gone ahead with a warrior, blah, blah, blah. So this kind of gives them an idea of what the mission was. And I can put this on their sheet to just say that they've completed this. Well, one thing personally that I didn't like about this is, one, the XP field, I would have gave them like 5 experience, even though that's absolutely nothing. That means they each get 1 XP. The other thing is that for their troubles, they're giving 10 gold. So I would have made a parcel, to be honest, and put this into this, I would have linked it in here for 10 gold. So that way it's easier for me to award it. I think the reason they didn't is because they don't know exactly how many players are going to be in here. So if that was the case, I would have still built the parcel, linked it in here, left it at 50 gold, and then if I needed to adjust it at that point, it'd be much easier than trying to just manually do this. But I'm not here to pick apart the way the modules are written. But this is the sort of things that I'm thinking about as I'm going through these modules. And once you understand how Fantasy Grounds work, you can kind of make those criticisms and such. But for the most part, it's there for you. It gives you the basis of it. So it's not too big of a deal there. But I'm very picky and strict about that. I mean, if it can be done, let's do it. All right, so then they give you the role-playing inspiration ideas of how to present the data, how to get them involved with one another. How does the adventure start? How do they know each other? You know, the location, those sort of things. So that's the adventure hook. So I'm definitely going to place that in my review or my notes. And then the next thing is they talk about the Forgotten Realms. So if you've never adventured here, you don't know anything about it, and you kind of want to know a little bit more about the surroundings and the settings, you can take this chapter and put this in your notes and read over this. And the nice thing about it is it comes with a low resolution map. So you can share this with your players as you're building up your table for your game. And normally what I'll do is I'll stick this thing over here off to the side. And if you notice, there's these red pins. These are connected to story elements in the module, and the red pins mean that the players cannot see those. Those are Game Master only. So when you click on these, it brings up whatever notes that you had previously or the notes that were embedded in the module. And you can also delete the shortcuts as well. So it's up to you how you want to manage these pins, but they're basically just shortcuts. And you can make them shareable by right-clicking on them and clicking on Make All Links or Make This Link Shareable, and it turns it green. But in most cases, you don't want to do that. So you can turn it back to private. So that is just a way to... So that's everything for basically, for linking and stuff back and forth. It's very important that you learn this function, and it's very handy. So these notes are going to take place around or in Neverwinter. So I'm going to link the notes to the map just so they're there. And I'm going to link the map to my notes. So now they're back and forth. So if I close that, open it back up, it's there. Or if I accidentally close this, then I can click on this link and it brings my notes back up. So this is an easy way to kind of link things back and forth together, and an easy way to kind of nest it so that you're not losing track of it and you're not having to move everything around as much. So this is where I want the map to appear regardless. And to make this map visible to my players, and they won't see the red pins, so I don't have to worry about that. They'll see the locations and the art, but they're not going to see the actual red pins. So if I right-click on this link up here on the top left corner of the map, if you right-click on it, there's a sharing option, and in this, you can click on Stop Sharing or Share. Once you share this record, it pops up on the character side. They're able to see it. They can move it around or whatever they need to do. They need to position it just like you are. Like maybe they'll put it over here in the positioning for their actual tabletop, because everyone's table is going to look a little bit different because you don't have control over their windows. They have to learn how to make up their own setup like you have. And this is up to you to train them to make it easier for you in the long run. But you're not going to do that in one session. It takes time. So I'm going to go ahead and recenter this map. So if I right-click on it, click on View, and you can click on Zoom to Fill or Zoom to Fit. So I'm just going to go Zoom to Fit. I'm going to make it just a little bit wider because this is where my final position is on this. And then this little drop-down arrow gives you some more tools, like you can draw and stuff on here and erase the drawings. So if I click that, this is a Zoom to Fit button. So that way, if you're way over here or something, you want to go back, instead of scrolling 100 times, you can just click that and it'll recenter it for you. So that's kind of a handy little tool there for the map. So I'll share this map with them and go over their characters with them, talk a little bit about their quest, maybe do a little short combat that has nothing to do with the adventure, just to make sure their character sheets are working. And then, that's basically the sort of things I would do in session 1, get to know who they are, get their contact information. And then I have a little bit of reading and research to do. That's not too bad. I would probably do your session 0 and then read all this stuff and then start setting up for session 1 and getting that set up. And I'll show you how that works shortly. So is there any questions on this stuff here that we're doing? Okay. Just checking. All right. So that's an organizational tool. You don't have to do it. You can run it however you like. I'm not a backseat GM. I'm not trying to tell you how to run your table, but this makes life a lot easier, and it takes advantage of the things that Fantasy Grounds can do for you. So I'm going to go ahead and close the session 0 notes, but before I do that, if I bookmark this, and when I come back to the table after I've exited and everything's said and done, when I come back here, this is all I'm going to see. So when I want to come back, I can click on the combat tracker. My notes would be in I would already done that before I exited. Those come up there. And then I can just click on these really quick and get the character sheets to come up. And then that map, if I click that, that's going to come up. And then any of the reading materials that I had, that will also come up where I left them. So for instance, the background. That's not where I want that to go, but that's where I left it. So technically, I would have left it like this and left it like that. Now, if you bring up each one of these story entries separately, they're basically gonna be the way you left them. But if you just use the arrows down below, you go to the background, click the arrow, goes to the overview, click the arrow, goes to the adventure hook, click it again, it goes to this Forgotten Realms thing, and then it goes to the appendix for the monsters. It has an appendix for different tables and such. So if you use the arrows on here, it's a lot easier to do. You can click on each one of these individually, but you have to remember to go back and place them where you want them to pop up. In this case, once I use those arrows, it centered them in such a way that I don't have to remove them or change them around. So hopefully that makes sense. So this helps you with your table. So it is a little cluttered, but I know where things are going to be. Like if I want to get to that map, I just click up here and it brings the map forward. I want to get back to the story. It's right there. So you don't have to move things around. You just have to have them pop up where you want them. Now the next thing is I'm going to do the same thing I did before. So I know who my characters are. I have an idea of where we're starting. I have a little bit of idea of the surroundings and the module. Now I'm going to bring up the notes again. This time I'm going to make another entry. And this is going to be session 1. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to the calendar. When we were in session 0, we decided as a group that we're going to start the weekend of the 3rd on April 3rd. So I double click here. Here's the story entry. I'm going to change the time. We decided a little earlier this time, not 6. So we're going to go with 3 p.m. And I'm going to set the date. So now that's Saturday the 3rd. Now I can send both of these out to the chat window if I want. It's not necessary, but I did it anyways. I'll put that in there. Maybe I'll put it on the message of the day, whatever. And then I'm going to take my new notes that I just created, and I'm going to link that with this shortcut up here into the Game Master notes. Neverwinter, so just so they know that they're starting there. If I wanted to, I can link this map to here. And then when they come onto the table, if they want to bring that up themselves, they have a link to it. But it will pop up wherever they left their image. So if they sized it the way I did, it'll come up where they want it. So these are just some cool things that you can do to kind of make things a little easier on you. And then I'm going to link this journal entry onto my notes for session 1. When you access the calendar over time, you can view the log entry that you're currently on, or you can click on all logs and it creates a list of sessions that you've done. And then you'll have a link to all your notes, and you'll know what days it was. And especially if it's in-game sessions, this would be handy, so you know that this encounter took place on this day and those sort of things. So if you're going to use this for in-game, that would be helpful for that too. So these might be events instead of, session logs. So that is basically how I organize my campaigns. And now I'm going to start setting up for the encounters and the actual adventure, since this is session 1. So now that I've used the tools and the calendar, now I'm going to focus more on the story and the actual running of it. So is there any questions so far about that? And you can pretty much do this with most, or if not any, rule set. They may be titled differently, or they may have a little bit of different feel to it, but generally you can do the same thing. So if you're doing Pathfinder or Traveler or whatever rule set you use, this is the way you'd want to use it effectively, efficiently, and be a lot more rapid and quick about how you're presenting the data. So it really helps to have that understanding in the beginning and to have these shortcuts and have an understanding how it's laid out. So you guys are definitely getting a little bit of the benefit of that by taking these classes, going to these events, and also putting in the time to figure out the tool, because a lot of people want instant satisfaction. Well, you're not going to get that from this. You're really going to have to dig into it, to learn about it, watch videos, practice, use it. And that's how you're going to learn it. It's not going to come overnight. So if you're wanting to run this campaign like tomorrow, I think you're going to be able to wing it, but you're still going to find out that you have some things to work on. So honestly, it took me about a good year to get a good handle. Well, I wouldn't say a whole year, maybe 6 months to really get a good handle on it. From that point, I learned a lot of don't do this, don't do that. And that's kind of what we're showing you, is kind of bypassing a lot of the pain and giving you straight into using it instead of going through all this trial and error. It's okay to learn that way, but it is not conducive to somebody that doesn't have the time for it. Okay, so this is the notes that I want for session 1. And I'm going to go back to the story. Oh, and I'm going to borrow the link from here. I'm going to borrow the map. So I want that map so I don't have to keep coming back to the other notes. Because that's this here. And if I accidentally close it, then I want to be able to pop it back up for reference. Okay, so I got the image, I got the date set up, the time, we already kind of figured that out. And then I already kind of have an idea of who the players are now. So the thing I'm focusing more on is the actual story and the actual module. So I'm going to pop up story entries. Now I'm going to select the next chapter, which is part 1. You have an index So I'm going to go ahead and shortcut that just so I have it. So that way, if I need to jump around and read ahead, I can. There is the start when you leave Phandalin, and there's some reading here. And again, this should be down here and sized accordingly. So I should have started that with this one. This is part 1. And I delete that one. If I started off with the first entry, then I can just keep the size of this window, and I don't have to worry about resizing it every time I click on something. So this is part of the prep that I'd be doing for this first part. And so this would be probably about a week before we start, or a few days. Depends on your memory. And then once I've added the index, then I'm going to add the actual ambush, which is the thing we're going to focus on after this. It's the actual combat and how to set that all up. And then there's the Cragmaw hideout, which is a milestone or a goal. So if you can go from Neverwinter to this battle, and then you find the Cragmaw hideout if everything works out right, that is pretty much a good session time. That's probably about 3 hours, maybe 4. And that's where you'd want to stop. You might put in one other thing, maybe the cave mouth, if you get to that point. But there really isn't any reason to go beyond that unless you're marathon gaming, playing 12 hours a day. So this is a good chunk of time and prep, and an average thing you'd want to do on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So you have a little bit of reading. You have some window arranging to do. You have to set up your maps, make sure if you're going to use any, or your images that you want to hand out, those sort of things. So this is the part of when we're actually using the content that comes in the module and not just messing around with Fantasy Grounds. And then I'm going to show you some cool things that Fantasy Grounds can do in the midst of all that. So is there any questions before we go on to this session 1?
Other than I just joined, you'll probably have to walk me through what we're doing here, not how to play the game, but what we're doing with this Fantasy Grounds. Okay.
This session is being recorded, so I won't be able to backtrack. But this is being recorded. It'll be on YouTube, and I have other recordings. So if you missed out on most of this, that's fine, because we're already probably about halfway through at least. So, but hang tight. You get to see a couple cool things while you're here. Okay, so the next thing is, once I have my session 1 notes set up and I kind of have an idea of what's involved, I'm going to do a little reading. And when you go through this, you're going to find out that you're bringing up a wagon load. You're going from a city to kind of a rough and tumble town in the frontiers. Gundren was kind of clearly excited and more than a little secretive about his reasons for the trip. So he only said that he and his brothers had found something big, and that he'd pay you 10 gold pieces if you got the supplies to Phandalin. And then he said that he and his fellow are going to ride ahead of you and take care of some business. So you spent like maybe the last few days following the high road south from Neverwinter, and you've just recently veered east along the Tribor Trail. You've encountered no trouble so far, but this territory can be dangerous because bandits, outlaws, and who knows what else lurks along the trail. So this little chat window can be sent over to the chat area, so this little bubble here. So if you don't want to read it, you can send this over to your players and let them read it, or maybe somebody will read out loud for you while you read ahead. And then while they're doing that, you can read that you're encouraging them to role play. You ask them to think how they may know the Gundren. Actually, this dwarven hero cleric, if you go to his notes, somewhere along the lines he's related or like a cousin to Gungeon Rockseeker. Now that doesn't have to be that way, but somehow he's familiar with these individuals. So that's just a way to kind of tie them together. And then through that, the rest of the party members might know. One of them might know Sildar Hallwinter, the warrior guy, whatever it is. And then it says, ask the players to give you their marching order and how their characters are traveling. Like who's in front, who's bringing up the rear. And that's kind of what we were showing in the party sheet earlier. Is that we have a marching order here, so we know, or a sleeping order, watch order, and then for marching order, we could say that normally, in normal circumstances, that these characters might travel a certain way. So we might take their tokens and arrange them, and again, this would be shared with the party, not just for you in this case. And you can arrange these however you want to illustrate how they normally travel together. So you would set that up that way, and that's what the notes is saying in this module. Now, back in the pen and paper version, you'd probably just use scratch paper, or maybe you have miniatures. But in Fantasy Grounds, that's where you would show some of that type of thing, is using those tools, as opposed to just a battle map. You don't have to have a battle map or a top-down thing, or you can actually bring up that image, the map that we shortcutted, and provide a token for the party that just shows where they are on the map. So if you have something in your assets that you would like to use as like a party token, and just place it on the map wherever they are so that they get an idea of how far they've traveled. So you can do something like that. So it just depends on how much you're going to put into, your prep and how much you want to manage. But this is another way to kind of show their progress on the map, and you can tie it in with that the notes here that says that they need to know, where they're at and how they're traveling together. And it tells you about the wagon. It says any character can drive the wagon. There's no particular skill necessary. As 2 oxen are pulling it, if no one is holding the reins, they stop right where they're at. So you have to have one person piloting the animals. So what you could probably do is pick somebody in your party that has a decent animal handling skill, and then do it from there. Or maybe it is the dwarf that's doing it. Who knows? But he would be in the wagon. The rest of the people would probably be surrounding the wagon. So you could draw that on that map if you wanted to. You can just pretend like you have a make-believe wagon there. So on your party sheet, we can go into drawing mode and enter it. And then let's just draw a rectangle. It doesn't matter if it's good or not. And then what we'll do is we'll just say, okay, let me get out of the drawing mode first. So we'll say that Gundren is the pilot of the wagon. We'll say that this folk hero guy is, up front. He's a warrior type. This noble fighter is another warrior type, so he's up front. The wizard acolyte will be on the back here, and the rogue halfling will be back here. So you can kind of set it up like this, say this is basically how we're traveling on the road. And even though it's not fancy, you get the idea. So you don't have to have high-end, expensive assets to show this one little thing. That's a lot of extra work sometimes for nothing. So if you have to, just use what you have. Or you can even scan in a piece of graph paper, whatever you need to do to get your point across. So now what we're going to do is follow the story a little bit more. So we go to, let's see. So that was the index that we can jump around with. This was the area of the setup and talking about the wagon. And it's full of gear, and it's worth about 100 gold. If anyone were to look through it, you would find flour. You'd find salted pork. 2 kegs of ale, shovels, picks, crowbars, about a dozen of each, 5 lanterns, and a small barrel of oil, about 50 flasks in volume. And the whole total cargo is worth about 100 gold. Anybody get a clue as to what that might be for? Based on that gear? Anyone? You got food. There we go. A mining we will go. So if anyone made an educated guess, that would be kind of interesting. The cleric may know already, but if he was going to look through there, I would have him roll an investigation or maybe a history check or something. Give him an average thing, so if he sees that, if he rolls over a 5, he should be able to tell what's going on. If it's one of the other characters that's not familiar with mining as much, maybe the challenge rating's higher. Who knows? However, if you wanted to do a group roll, like you want to see if anyone in this group notices the gear and what it's for. So what I would do is bring up the party sheet, and this way you don't have to announce it. You can actually just roll against their perception or whatever. So I'm going to change down here on the bottom. There's a skill check that can be done as a group. Right now it's hidden, so if I roll, it's not going to show in the chat. And it's going to roll against everybody's perception or everybody's intelligence, whatever you want to do. So what I'm going to do is change this to maybe history or maybe survival. Maybe that has something to do with the challenge rating, whatever you think is appropriate. I'm going to go ahead and click on Insight, just because I don't know any better what would actually fit for the situation. But you can just do a regular intelligence check. That might be better. And then the DC challenge rating's 10. And then you can click on the roll, and what it will do is it will roll against everybody's intelligence, and it will let me know who in the party might have an idea of what this gear is for. So if I click here on the roll, it's going to roll for everybody at once, and anybody that's successful, it'll say success or fail. So the rogue knows, and the wizard knows, and of course the dwarf knows. But both the fighters are clueless. They don't know what stuff's for. All they see is the pork and the meat and the beer. They don't see the rest of it, so they can't see past that. But nonetheless, that's a way to use Fantasy Grounds to kind of determine things without announcing. Because instead of saying, okay, everybody, roll a intelligence check, they're going to know that they're supposed to be looking for something. If I roll this hidden, and I just kind of compare it to the strengths and weaknesses of the party, I can narrate this and say, okay, well, you guys are looking through the stuff, and a few of you understand that this equipment is more than just supplies, and then go from there. So it would be based on a success and failure and the degree of success and failure. So this rogue rolling an 18. What do you think that would look like? Or what would that sound like in your narrative if he rolls an 18 versus a 10? Anyone give me an idea of what that would sound like if you're running the game? How would you describe that success? Probably, give him some sort of... The test was intelligence versus noticing and having an understanding of what is in the wagon. Like, what is it they're actually hauling? At some point, somebody's going to get curious. You don't even have to announce exactly what they see unless they ask, and then you can say, oh, well, you already know what your answer is going to be. So, yeah, what you see versus what it means, exactly. So I made them I rolled an intelligence check in the background. I didn't announce it. I just figured if someone gets nosy enough, they're going to ask. And when they do ask, you're going to be able to tell them, yeah, so the rogue suspects that there is a new mining operator. Exactly. Okay. What about the guy that rolled a 5 or a 4? Here's the worst one. The human noble, the guy that's supposed to be charismatic and charming, doesn't probably have a clue about mining, but what is his observation of the equipment like? Gundren has prospects, yep. That's exactly what probably the dwarf thinks. Yeah, so he's clearly isn't familiar with manual labor, peasant food. Okay, yeah, exactly. So I like those explanations. So when you get a degree of success or failure, instead of just being a number saying pass or fail, let's think about what the actual data means. What does an 18 mean convert versus a 5? Okay, here's a tougher one. He needed a 10, he rolled a 10. So what does that mean? That's actually harder. It's easier to describe failure or success. It's harder to describe rolling the exact number. And this is important. This is the connection between role-playing, numbers, and Fantasy Grounds. Basic knowledge, but not much interpretation. Yep. So basically that person knows it's mining gear. That's it. They don't care if it's for anything or they know it's there. They figured maybe it's just supplies. They don't have any any expectations. Although everything seems normal here. Exactly. And that makes sense also coming from that character because he's somewhat tied into his cousin. And being a dwarf, that's a normal thing to see. So that really makes sense. All right, one last thing. What does it look like for number 22? So this person, the wizard, she's what kind of wizard is she? I don't remember, but she's a wizard. She's a high elf, and she rolled the highest out of everybody. She rolled 10 or 12 over the necessary number. So the wizard knows some history of the area and suspects exactly what Gundren is after. Exactly. Excuse me. I couldn't said it better myself. So she knows about mining operations. And she doesn't even have to tell anyone. You could actually secretly pass a message to that player, and if she wants to divulge that information, she can. You can have a little story entry already made up about, the assumptions, and you can drag and drop that text to the player themselves, and no one else can read it. That way, she can do it in role play instead of just saying, "Okay, the wizard knows this, this, and that." You can actually have her decide how she wants to divulge the information. So that's an important thing about role-playing and using your tools along with your imagination and with with what you have presented in the story context. Okay, so this is a nice tool to have when you don't want to announce things or if you need to do a group check. So I'll do one more example, then I'll move away from that. But I think that is a really good idea of how to use the tool by using some of these group checks. So let's try something else. This time we are going to be sneaking past a group of people in Neverwinter. We don't want anyone to know that we left town. We don't want anyone following us. So we're going to use stealth. We're going to leave in the cover of night. So that may or may not give us advantage depending. And the passive perception of a normal guard is like 12 or 13. I think it's 13. I don't want to look up the stats, so I'll just assume it's 13. I know it's more than 10. It's either 12 or 13. So a normal guard would have stealth, or not stealth, but a DC challenge rating based off their passive perception, which is 13, because they're used to watching for things. And they probably have a higher wisdom. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to roll a group roll against the passive perception of the guard at the gate. All they're trying to do is sneak out of Neverwinter. They do not want to be seen or noticed, and the wagon is actually outside already. So they don't have to roll that through. So that's something that you can decide on how you want this to go. The aftermath of this roll would be pretty. It could be pretty interesting. So leading up to this roll, maybe there's a spy, or maybe somebody is after one of these characters. Maybe the rogue has some enemies or something like that. So in order to leave town without that problem coming up between there and Phandalin, I'm going to roll to see if these guys can make it out of town without being noticed. And they're really trying. They're covering themselves in cloaks. They're going in groups of 2. They're slipping in and out when other people are coming and going. They're doing that sort of thing to avoid, and they're trying to evade basically detection. So if they if they roll 13 or higher, they're successful. If not, then there might be some repercussions. It might not even announce what the problems will be. So I'm going to go ahead and roll. It's still a hidden roll. This little eyeball right here. If I want it in the open, I can click on it. In this case, I don't want them to know, but they're going to describe to me how they're doing their task. So they're basically doing what I said before. They're sneaking in between people coming and going. So they're using that as cover, basically. So if they had a disguise kit, I might give them advantage, and I might have to roll individually. But if they're not doing something specific like that, then I'm going to just use this generic roll. So we'll see. It's basically pass or fail, but I want to know how much or how well or how bad or how poorly. So I rolled here, and there's some disadvantages here that came up. So that was rolled automatically because of the type of armor. So for instance, the human noble is wearing a heavy armor. So if I bring up that character's sheet and go to the main tab, they have a 17 armor class. They're very slow, but they have a good armor class. And if I open up this little magnifying glass next to the shield here, it's going to show that he's proficient, and he's wearing probably chainmail, and there's stealth disadvantage. So the people that have heavy armor or noisy armor or bulky armor are going to have problems. So the dwarven healer, the cleric, and the noble have basically failed. Everyone else has been able to make it outside. And as a matter of fact, the rogue snuck out like they should. The wizard was right behind him. I mean, she's probably went with him. The fighter probably went ahead and said, oh crap, those guys are lagging behind. So he probably he's kind of lightly armored, so he doesn't have a lot of armor. So he made it through. But Mr. Squeaky and Mr. Clanky here, they not only did they make noise, but they're so heavily armed and such that it just, the guards noticed that they left. And that's all we were determining. And then what I would do with that information is I'd probably make some notes or something. And at some point, I might pull that out and say, okay, they were detected at the gate. Maybe somebody had questioned the guards if they saw the party leaving at that time. And that would tie in somewhere later on in the story. Or I can say, halt, who goes there? And maybe the guards want to question them, like, why are they so heavily armed? What are they doing? What's their business? That sort of thing. Generally, they do that when you're coming into the city, though. So in this case, they would take a mental note, like, hey, there's some heavily armed dudes leaving. I wonder what's going on with that. So they would take a mental note of that. They wouldn't do anything about it. And they may or may not pass it on to somebody of authority or somebody that's bribing them. So it all depends on what you want to do. The rogue doesn't even see himself, let alone others seeing him. Yeah, he snuck right out. So this is just some things that you would want to keep in mind with doing skill checks and rolls. You can roll off the sheet, or you can roll in this area. So let's go back to the rogue. Let's say it's his turn. So I'm going to hit next actor, or on the player side, it's going to say turn complete. And then on his sheet, if I pull it up, he has some skills on here. And there's acrobatics, deception, investigation. These are the stuff that he's proficient with. He has thieves' tools, and he has stealth. So let's say he used a disguise kit. Okay. So that's deception, or it could be stealth or whatever, or performance or persuasion or whatever you want it to be. So he's going to try to, let's reset, and let's say that he's going to disguise himself as a guard. And he's going to go up to the guard tower and say, okay, you're relieved. I'm the new guy. Beat it. And that way, it ensures that everyone can get through the gate without being noticed. So he's going to roll a deception roll, and he's wearing a disguise kit, so that's going to give him advantage. So I'm going to click on ADV, which is the advantage button, before I do anything else. And then you can double click on the deception roll, or you can do whatever you need to do. Depends on what roll you want to use. But in this case, I'm going to use deception because he actually has to talk to the guy and say, okay, I'm here to relieve you. You need to go to the barracks or whatever. So if I double click here, it's going to put that in the chat. If I don't want everybody to know what the result was and only the rogue is rolling, I can have him roll in the dice tower however you want to do it. It's up to you. But I think I'm just going to roll and just let it ride. But normally I'd have this in the dice tower. But it is a deception roll. It's not like he's stealthing or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and roll. And he has to roll against this a similar perception roll. So he has to roll a 13 or higher. So I'm going to go ahead and roll. And I think some guards might have insight, so it's probably at least 12 or 13. So I'm going to go ahead and go with that. So if I double click on this total, it's rolling with advantage. And what do you know? He rolled a 20. Wow. So the guard says, okay, yes, sir. Nice to meet you. And he takes off. The rogue takes over his position on the wall. And then the party members go through with no problems at all. So this is just a way to show you how to roll dice, and also you have advantage and disadvantage buttons right here that you click on before you make a roll. And this tells me he rolled a 20 plus 5. This guy aced it. They thought he was a new commander. So, I mean, this is the usages that you could use in this particular scenario or situation. So you have to adopt Fantasy Grounds to use it the way you want to use it. And you got to practice with it in order to get the best out of it. So that was awesome. And normally I would have had this probably hidden from the rest of the party, just so they don't metagame and overreact. So if he failed that, and then the guy rolled an insight check and found out he was lying and decided to apprehend him, that may be something I don't want them to respond to right away. So that's why I might put it in the dice tower. So that is just a suggestion. So that's just kind of like how the rules work. And now I need to set up for the actual combat. So when we get to the chapter where the actual ambush takes place, it's going to say the following. You've been on the Tribord Trail for about half a day. So if you bring up the map, the Tribord Trail starts, it breaks off the edge here, and you're going through here, and then there's another turn that takes you to Phandalin. Well, the hideout is here, and right here is Tribord Trail itself. And there's an image that I found in the module that we can use for that combat. Because this particular module, it did not provide a map for the first combat. And it was made for Theater of the Mind. That's why they did that. So it wasn't also made for Virtual Tabletop initially. So people have adapted. They've made maps for it. So if you go on the DM's Guild or go to the Patreon of a certain members, they have beautiful maps that replicate what needs to happen for this particular scenario. So you can build your own map in Fantasy Grounds once you get used to using the tools and the assets, or you can import your own map and replace it, or substitute or supplement, however you want to do it. So in this case, on the Tribord Trail, there is no battle map. Okay, there just isn't, unless you bring in something. So the way they wanted you to run this is there's an encounter, and they're just basically floating here until you're ready for it. So if you wanted to, you can link this encounter to the map to make it convenient for you, or whatever you want to do. But at this point, when they go on the Tribord Trail, it says that when you come around the corner, you spot 2 dead horses sprawled about 50 feet ahead of you, blocking the path. Each has several black-feathered arrows sticking out of it. The woods press close to the trail here with a steep embankment and dense thickets on either side. So when you get to that point, you send this out, and then if anyone wants to investigate, it says that when you approach the horses, you can identify the horses as belonging to Gungeon Rockseeker. But if you read this, it says, if you are using Meet Me in Phandalin Adventure Hook, then any character who approaches to make a closer investigation can identify the horses as belonging to Gungeon Rockseeker and Sildar Hallwinter. The horses have been dead for about a day, and it's clear that the arrow had killed them. When the characters inspect the scene closer, you read the following. So you drop this back into the chat, and it says, there's saddlebags nearby, and they've been looted. Nearby lies an empty map case. As soon as the players go for that, that's when these goblins jump out and ambush them. There's 4 of them. And the way this is set up is you would just hit the down arrow right off the story entry, and that adds them to the combat tracker. And you can run the entire combat through this combat tracker if you don't have a map or an image or anything else. You can actually drag and drop all of the attack rolls and such from the character sheets and from the stat blocks onto the combat tracker. There are other ways to handle this if you want to use a map or something else instead of just doing it that way. But if you're going to do it this way, and let's say the goblins won the initiative, or they, in this case, they're hiding and they get to be ambushed, so they would basically roll against the party's passive perception. So we need to determine that first. So in the notes here, it says that the goblins are hiding. You need to know their stealth modifier, and that's a +6. So if you click on the stat block, this is where I would have done this before we actually ran the combat. I would have this set up to where I would not be doing this usually in the middle of a class or the actual event, because you're going to take time. But this is how I'd arrange them so that you're not taking up time. You do this a little bit before your session. So they're all laid out now. And the nice thing is I have these goblins changed in the options. So when I mean changed, I'm going to the options over here, and I have a few things that I've changed on the encounter itself. So for instance, when you add combatants to this, it gives them a number. So I have Goblin 6, Goblin 12, Goblin 9, and Goblin 2. So when you are on the combat tracker and you can see the goblins, what does that make you think when you have that numbering sequence? So there's 4 goblins there in the encounter total. But when you see that they are labeled or numbered with all these other numbers, that does a couple things. 1, it keeps from metagaming. And 2, it freaks them out, because if you have number 12 of whatever, that's scary. That's like a dozen goblins. So there's a randomization that you can put on this. So when you add combatants more than 1, it will put some random number on it. That way your players can't guess the strength of the goblins. There may be other waves or whatever, but that fools them into thinking that there's more than there really is. So that's a good thing. That could be confusing to them at first, but for you, it's kind of fun, because now they have no idea what the strength of this thing is. If they see 4 goblins, people that metagame will calculate in their head and go, okay, yeah, that's something you want to avoid. So that helps with that. Also, when you go to, there's this NPC roles, variable or fixed. I have it on variable. So what happens is you can do fixed or variable. What that does is it changes the damage. So the damage on these guys is an average of 5. So if you turn it on a fixed number, no matter how many times they hit somebody, it's always going to be 5. And there is some good to that. So you can tell within 2 hits, each one of these characters is at risk of dying. Whereas if you leave it on variable, it could be anything. So a random roll of 5, or of a 1d6 plus 2 is 8. They would probably kill half of these party members in 1 hit. So if you want to control that, you can change it, and it will use 5 instead of the random roll. So that's what that's for. But I have it on random. I appreciate that swing. I appreciate that swing instead of the actual, number. The other thing I changed to make this more variable is when you have in the house rules, the NPC hit points are random. So instead of only having 7 hit points every time, you add them to the combat tracker. Because this is when your metagamers say, well, commonly goblins only have 7 hit points. Well, in this case, it's going to roll the 2d6 instead. So each one of these goblins has a little bit different hit points so that they cannot assume or judge based off just the fact that they're a goblin. So I like that option. It keeps the metagaming down. And then one other thing that's randomized is their initiative. So you can set it up as a group. So if you ran this in normal mode and not adjusting this at all, they would all have the same hit points, the same initiative, and they'd be numbered 1 to 4. So what I've done is I've changed the initiative. So when they roll, it's add auto NPC initiative is on. But if it's on group, it'll roll in groups of types of creatures. So if it was a boss and 4 of these, the boss would have his own and the goblins would have their own. But in this case, I just have it on, so it just rolls randomly for everybody. And then you can turn it off where you have to manually go in and roll for the group. So it's up to you how you want to do it. But I like these variables, and it keeps a lot of that metagaming and guessing stuff down. So you can change that, and it'll make things more interesting. So those are some combat options and some things that you'd have in there for running your game, so that when it's being ran, you don't have the same thing over and over and over. All right, so the next thing is to actually, instead of running this combat the way it is now, so what would happen is if you didn't have a map or anything, if it was this goblin's turn, he would take this attack roll and drag and drop it on any one of these people that he's next to. So we'll just use the fighter, for example, or actually the criminal. So if you drag and drop that, it brings it down and it tells you it was a miss. So he used his attack roll as scimitar and he missed. If he had hit, then you would roll the damage. And it would tell you, oh, there's heavy damage, and it records it. So you can run this whole thing right through this combat tracker. So if it became this folk hero's turn, on his sheet, on his actions tab, he can take his greatsword and attack the goblin just by dragging and dropping on the sheet. And he has disadvantage because he's prone, because I didn't change his effect. So I need to remove the prone effect. That was from earlier. So he rolled with disadvantage because he was prone. He was on the ground. And then if he had hit, then I would roll, drag and drop the damage. So that is basically how you can run everything in the combat tracker. You don't even need a map. But I think that's kind of missing the point with a lot of virtual tabletops. So to kind of change this, I'm going to go ahead and go to menu, and I'm going to just delete the foes. So if I click the garbage can, and I have 2 options, non-friendly or foes. So non-friendlies are neutrals and non-friendlies. So I'm just going to go with non-friendly. And that gets rid of all the monsters. Then I'm going to go to the menu, and I'm going to go to rest, and I'm going to give everyone a long rest because I want everything reset. And then as far as initiatives go, if you wanted to clear it, you can go to menu, you go to initiative, and you can clear all initiatives. And that's now everything's kind of reset back the way it was. So now I'm going to set this thing up, this actual combat, as an actual, thing in my game. So I have this note set up for my session 1. The encounter, I'm going to drag and drop that on here because I want that. And then I found a picture in the actual images and maps. And if I go to the artwork, I went through these. And there's the cover there's a picture of the goblins. So I like that, so I might use that to show the players. A handout. So that's that. So I'm going to use that to show the players once the goblins hop out and try to attack them. The next thing is I'm going to take and look at this Tribord Trail image. And I thought, this is perfect for this session. So I'm going to drag and drop this image into my notes. And I put battle maps just so I remember. And then I'm going to size this to where I want it to show up. So it's going to be up here. And if I expand, it's going to have all the things on here that I need. And I've already done this work ahead of time, but you can share this stuff. I'm going to actually delete these so you can see from what I started with and what I ended up with. I can delete all the tokens by right-clicking, delete all tokens. And then I'm kind of undoing what I did earlier. And then for the grid, I can turn that off and basically start from scratch. So this image was something that I thought would work really well. It keeps the immersion, but it's still kind of theater of the mind. It's not very tactical. And it basically gives me the ability to keep the story going and not worry about, all this other garbage that people fret about. So basically, this is the map or the image. You can use any image you want. And then what you could do is have this to where this map here has an effect on it too. So I'll turn that off for right now. So this is the image. This is what it started off as. And then when you want to use an image, and it can be a picture or even graph paper, whatever you want to use, you turn on the grid, and then you set the size. So in this case, it's 60 by 60. And then you could change the color. So if I could change it to light blue, and then you could change the opacity so it's not so bright and obnoxious. And that's basically the grid. So that's the first thing you need to do to any map. Then I added an effect, which was, in this case, it was mist. So I have it hidden right now, but when you have this across the map, it kind of gives it more interesting look. And then if I want to add rain, I can add another layer, go to the effects area, and pick rain. And that will add the rain to this. Now what will happen here is that I can turn down the amount. I can turn down the amount so it's not heavy. And then I can, let's see. I see that the direction, you can change the direction it's coming from. You can change the intensity. I can turn down the speed a little bit. It's kind of hard to see with the mist, but if you put the mist in front of it, it's really going to be even less visible. So I have the mist. I can put the mist, in front. Now both of these are behind that. I don't want that. So anyways, you have the rain on top so that you can see it. And then you would just adjust according to what you need. So in this case, I might put the intensity up a little. There we go. So this is showing like rain here. So it kind of gives you that immersion. And then at this point, I will take the green helmet, or the green face in this case, drag and drop all of the characters at once for a starting location. And then once you do that, you click on the dice, which is the play mode, and then you'll just sort these out accordingly. So remember, we had basically the folk hero over there, and we had her back here, or maybe it was him. But nonetheless, the dwarf was here on the wagon, and that's basically their starting position. And then the goblins, once they get to this point, my session 0 notes for this, I don't need that. I need my session 1 notes. All right, here we go. So session 1 is going to be linked to this map. It's linked to the map now. I'm going to get rid of this pin. I don't need it. I don't know what that's from. And then I'm going to probably just pop this open occasionally. I might link this image so I can share that with the group. I will take the actual encounter, the goblins themselves, and link that here. So is there any questions so far? This is just setup. Okay. So now I have the players on the map. Now I want to set up the ambush. So this is an ambush. It's not random. So I want to place the goblins where I want them to be in the context of this. So it says they're on either side of the road. There's 2 melee and 2 missile attacks. The missile guys are about 30 feet away from the party. And I haven't determined yet if the goblins are going to get the jump on the party or not. So on the stat block, they have a +6 on stealth. This would be something that I would roll in the dice tower if I was playing live, or when I'm just by myself prepping, I'll just roll it. So the party's passive perception altogether, the highest or average of their passive perception is 13 or lower. So it's probably like 12 point something. So I'm going to roll the dice here and drop it in here. And if you add that up, that's a 14. So that beats all of their passive perceptions. So that means the goblins would get a jump on them. So they get a surprise round. So each goblin, I'm going to place them. One here. One over there. One up here. And one over there. Now, when some content that you purchase, you don't have to do this. It's already done for you. But in this case, there was no map, so there was no placement. So I had to add these in myself, which is not a big deal. And I'll lock this, click to fit type thing. And now I know the goblins are placed. When I close the encounter, they disappear. That's fine. So now in the narrative of the story, once the players move up to investigate the horses, that's when the attack starts. So it tells you that they'll fight all the way until the last one. He'll try to flee. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the combat just to give you an idea of what that's like. So how are we doing on time, everybody? Is everybody stick around? Or I think we're close to 3 hours right now. Okay. Anybody have to leave? That's fine. Just remember this.
I'll have to take off, but it's been great.
Okay. Just remember, I'm going to put this on YouTube, on the Fantasy Grounds College YouTube. And then I'm also running this session tomorrow live on the Blighted Lands stream at noon Central. And then we also have classes in our community, Fantasy Grounds Community College. So if you guys want to continue this and get more into it and dedicate more time to it, definitely encourage you to do that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So we do this year round. So this is kind of like a treat for me. This is not anything different than I do every week. But I like the idea that we're at the convention. So now what we have here is this rain is coming down. The goblins got the jump on the party. So when I bring up the actual encounter, I might show this to them after the goblins pop out. Once they get to this point in the story, I click the down arrow. Now the goblins are added, and they are in their positions. They're not visible yet on the map or the combat tracker. So I will select this first goblin to go. It's one of these guys up here. Goblin number 1 is up in the tree. So I'm going to go ahead and make an attack roll. So he's going to pop out of his hiding location. So he's going to move 10 feet. Now by default, I just targeted himself. By default, these should be locked. So if you right click on the map and you lock the tokens, if I hold down the Alt key, it will keep track of their movement. So that was 15 feet. I don't know why, but anyways, that's because I moved back and forth. So this goblin popped out. He is now visible, so I'll click on the combat tracker. Now the party members can see him. He's no longer in hiding. He's going to target this human noble. So I'm going to hold down the right control key. I have to make sure I have the goblin selected first. So he's visible now. I'm going to hold down the right control key. And as you can see, when you have this goblin highlighted, it shows you the distance between him and the target. And it will let you know if he has anything in the way. It doesn't tell you that, but visually, you'll have to see, okay, there's no people or an obstruction or anything. And then what I will do at this point, since he's targeted, I don't have to drag and drop the attack on the target. I can simply take his stat block, and here it's a short bow on the combat tracker. Now I don't want to use this sheet, although I could. I want to use the attack roll in here. So if you scroll down the sheet, you can technically take this and double click on the attack roll and still execute it. But it's better to do it from the combat tracker. Even though that this NPC is this goblin, I tend to try to use the combat tracker because sometimes these get unlinked, and I don't know how that happens, but it does. So I want to make sure it's linked to this battle map. So what I'm going to do is double click on the ATK +4. So if I go to this area here is where I'm talking about, this area for the short bow. So ATK +4 is the attack roll. So all I have to do is double click. It rolls against his armor class with all the adjustments made, and it's a miss. So the narrative would be, let's see, his armor class is probably fairly high. So he probably just kind of sailed over his shoulder, and it kind of went harmlessly off in a harmless direction. Now the goblins have nimble escape, so they can disengage or hide. So he has enough movement to move back and hide. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down the Alt key, move him back to his cover, put him back here. Now he's not really hidden, but he has cover. He's trying to hide. He's behind something. But if he was to be hidden, I can take his visibility off the map. But in this case, he knows where he's at. He just can't shoot straight at him. He'd have to shoot through some cover. So that's his turn. So that's the goblin's turn. So he's actually in the hide condition. So now that that's occurred and he's done his movements, he said something in Goblin. Now, if anybody here knows Goblin, what I would do is click on the Goblin's little bubble up here, and in the combat tracker or the chat window, it shows Goblin 1. I'm going to select Goblin for the language, and he's going to say something. He says, you know, stupid adventurers, you're going to die. Now hit enter. The DM can see the gibberish goblin, and they can see the if you have that on your character sheet, you can see the translation. So if any of these characters had Goblin on their sheets, they could see what the Goblin said and they can read it, translate it. So I would probably have some canned responses on the back here. If I edit the character, I'd probably put 4 or 5 different statements and just click on the bubbles and send them to chat. But you have to select the language first. It doesn't automatically do that. You have to manually select the language. I wish it would give you options to select which language it's speaking in. Nonetheless, though, you can send that to the chat for role-playing and immersion, which is really cool. And then your players can also talk back and forth in other languages if they have them on their sheets. It's just a matter of how their characters are set up. But on a character sheet, on their abilities tab, their languages are listed here. As long as they're spelled correctly and they're listed as individual lines here, that means that when the language is spoken here in the chat area, they can translate it or they can speak in that language. That's kind of a cool feature. So the Goblin targeted him, missed, and then I would pass the turn. So this is my job. So next actor. So now it's this guy here. So he wants to try to come out and make some craziness for this warrior. So he's going to come out of hiding. So he's just going to come out, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key and let go. And he can move 30 feet. So I will approve that. He moved through some bushes and such. So that's perfect for as far as his range goes. And he's going to try to slide the scimitar into the rib cage of this human noble. So this time he's going to use the scimitar. So I'm not targeting. In this case, I'm going to drag and drop. So I can drag and drop it to here, or I can drag and drop it on top of the token. And that's a 23, so that hit the human noble. So that's going to hurt. And then I can take the target damage and either drag it on the token, or in this case, I'll drop the damage in the combat tracker just so you can see you do both. And he took 5 points of damage. It automatically calculates the bonuses and everything. So that kind of hurt. So that's his turn, basically. Now he can disengage since he has only moved 20 feet. So I'm going to move back 10 feet. Again, I'm going to hold down the Alt key. And then I would approve it. There's no attack of opportunity because as a bonus action, they're allowed to do that as goblins. So they get the benefit of the doubt. That's their nimble escape. So their bonus turn is to disengage. So that's what he did. So that's his turn. And he goes, nah, 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 nah. So that's kind of what he's doing there. Goblin number 7 is setting up for another pop shot at these guys. So he comes out of hiding. And he's going to target this folk hero. So I hold down the right control key. I have my token selected or the character selected first. And then if you do that, it allows for you to target the player. Sometimes if you don't have it selected, it'll target himself. So you got to make sure you have him targeted. And then I'm going to go ahead and roll. This is for a short bow. You can see the range is here. He's well within range. 25 feet away. There's a double click, and with the bonuses that he had, he scored a hit. So his arrow shoots through these little brush and sticks this guy in his thigh. And I'm going to roll the damage. So again, I can drag and drop it, or I can drop it in here. In this case, I'll just drop it on him. And now he has heavy damage. So it's recorded here in the dialogue. So that hurts pretty bad. So that sucked. So now I'm going to hit the down arrow. Now it's this goblin's turn. So he's going to move over. I'm going to hold down the Alt key. And I will approve it. And he has a choice. He's going to go after the weaker target. So everybody doing okay so far?
Sorry to interrupt, but this is Brett King. I think I have a game starting this channel now.
Okay, we can bail out. If anybody wants to watch the videos that I've made that goes over the last part of this, at any point, if you guys want to join our college to go further with this, you can. I'm sorry that we ran out of time, but we have to make way for the next group of people. So is there any, if you guys want to message me privately, I put in the checks channel, I put in all the resources that we used. If you scroll back up, there's our join link for our community. There's some audio troubleshooting stuff. And I've given you the curriculum and the module for this material. So there's other things you can do to learn. But again, apologize, and we'll call it a go, and we'll be out of here, Brett. So, all right, folks. Thanks. Thank you. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye. And that's a